Robert F. Kennedy Jr., thank you very much indeed for coming back to Uncensored. Your reaction to this news of Julian Assange being released? We understand he's now just left Bangkok for the final leg of the journey to go to this tiny little island, Saipan, in the Northern Mariana Islands in the South Pacific, and he will do this plea deal tomorrow. He'll be on a plane and sent home a free man to Australia. What's your response?
I mean, my response is this is good for our country. It's good for democracy. Julian Assange is a journalist. He did exactly what journalists are supposed to do. You know, my uncle Pierce gave a speech in April of 1961, which is one of his most memorable speeches on the topic of secrecy. And he said that during that speech, that government secrecy is repugnant to a free people, and that it is antithetical to American democracy. And, you know, the odd thing about Julian Assange's imprisonment is that the American press did not rise up in outrage and indignation to object on this. I said yesterday on Twitter that we should not just release Julian Assange and Edwin Snowden, but that we should build a monument to him in Washington as a civics lesson to the American public about the importance of free speech and the First Amendment in this country. It is the foundation stone for the American experiment with self-governance. Everything in democracy relies on the free flow of information. And government, of course, the role of government is to constantly try to increase its power by reducing transparency and reducing the information we have about their deliberations. But of course, in a democracy, a transparent government is the essence of democracy. That's what Julian Assange did for us.
But you will also know from your uncle, JFK, from your father, that when you're actually in government, when you're running the country, a president has to have very private conversations sometimes with other world leaders about very sensitive matters, where there is an expectation that those conversations will remain private for very good reasons. They may have very damaging consequences. And it was the scattergun approach of Julian Assange, where he didn't redact anything. He just put it all out there without really, it seemed, much thought or care about the potential consequences of some of the unredacted stuff. I mean, should there not be any line? I mean, if you were the President of the United States, you're running for office now, for the highest office in the land, would you not expect and want some of those communications you have as President about national security to remain secure?
I would want journalists to exercise some discretion if, for example, there are confidential sources in another country whose names are exposed and who could put their lives in danger. And I think that there are legal ramifications for that anyway. There are civil and criminal lawsuits for that. But in terms of government secrecy, I just think that government in a democracy, we are reliant on transparency in our government. We want to know what our leaders are supposed to do and are doing, what they're up to, what they're talking about, how they're making their decisions. And the more transparency, the better off we're going to be.
Should he have effectively, he's about to be convicted of a crime involving conspiracy to commit espionage. Should he be convicted of that crime?
No, he shouldn't. He shouldn't have been prosecuted. And, I'm disappointed that he had to make this guilty plea. I understand personally it was important to him. His health is very shaky, and, he needed to be home. I think it's a disappointment again in our government that they forced him to make this guilty plea rather than recognizing that what he actually did is a service to American democracy. He exposed things, the revelations that Chelsea Manning released to him about the misbehavior of some of the contractors in Iraq and Afghanistan and many, many other important issues that we need to know about in a democracy, that our government, of course, the government would love to conceal for us the My Lai massacre. They'd love to conceal from us what Daniel Ellsberg released in the Pentagon Papers in 1973. Thousands of pages of lies that the government had told us for 20 years that Americans never knew about. And we could have avoided these wars if the government was telling us the truth. So the government has an interest in lying to us, and it's doing that now regularly, more and more every day. And the best interest for the American public, the best interest of democracy, is absolute transparency.
I mean, I as somebody who believes passionately in free speech as a journalist, I kind of find myself agreeing with pretty much everything you've been saying. But of course, what people will want to feel is that, I mean, for example, we've got President Trump facing criminal charges over storing classified documents at his house where it's surrounded by Secret Service. You know, should he be facing those charges if we're going to say that any journalist who acquires classified documents should absolutely be able to publish them with impunity? In other words, how closely guarded should things like national secrets be?
Well, I think that's altogether a different issue, because that is, I don't know much about that case, and I don't know about the interaction. The president has a right as president to declassify any document that he wants. So I'm not sure what the interactions and the interplay between presidential power and executive power and, retaining those documents. I know that President Biden also took a lot of those classified documents home, and that the prosecutor decided that he should not be prosecuted, not because he hadn't broken the law, but because he was too mentally incapacitated, which I think is a controversial decision.
Yeah.
But I think it's a completely different issue. The role of, as you know, Piers, the role of a free press in a democracy is to maintain, as Louis Brandeis said, a fierce skepticism towards government and government authority. The role of a journalist is to dig up things that the government does not want you to hear and expose that to the public. And we all recognize that the impulse of a government is always going to make make everything secret, because that increases their power. If we have no idea what our government is doing, they no longer belong to us. We are no longer the boss. We are the boss of our democracy, and they need to be honest with us and transparent. And there may be certain things that should be kept secret for a long time. If you're gonna, drop a nuclear bomb on Hiroshima or something like that, you want to keep it secret for a while. If you're developing a nuclear bomb, you want to. The president of this country has always been very good about that. But it always is a tough call, because really the essential role of the press in a democracy, and democracy cannot function without a free press. Today, one of the things that's happened with the press is that they no longer do that job. They've become propagandists for government rather than speaking truth to power. They become stenographers and propagandists for government and government agency. We saw this during COVID. We saw it during the Iraq War, where the New York Times had to apologize for using lies, government lies, to broadcasting those to the public without proper scrutiny. So, it almost always is a bad idea for the press to keep the government secrets. We want them to be, we are the boss.
Yeah.
They
I agree with you.
us,
I mean, do you think
right?
whoever...
They shouldn't be lying to us.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, do you think whoever wins the presidential race in November, they'd have the power to pardon Julian Assange? Do you think whoever that person is should pardon him?
I would definitely pardon him, and I'll pardon Edwin Snowden too. And there's other whistleblowers that I would pardon too. I think we should encourage whistleblowers. Whistleblowers are the heroes of democracy. They're not villains. Edwin Snowden disclosed to us that the NSA was spying on the American people, that it was gathering all of our phone data, our text messages, our emails. Nobody knew that. He disclosed that to the public, and then Congress went and enacted laws regulating it as a direct result of Edward Snowden's disclosures. And so why are we punishing him as a supervillain and a criminal? He did a great service for our democracy and for the world. He's a hero. We should be building monuments to him, not putting him in jail.
Just before I let you go, and I really appreciate you joining me, the presidential debate is on Thursday. 90 minutes, unfettered, between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. First time either has been in any debate since their last one 4 years ago. But last time I spoke to you, you were hoping to be on that debate. Do you feel you should be there?
Yeah, I should be there. I mean, honestly, nobody should be there because nobody qualifies under the criteria that CNN established, and because nobody has 270 delegates, enough, are on the ballot enough states to win 270 delegates. I'm the closest. Neither of them have any delegates at this point. Plus the other criteria that I have 4 polls from 12 separate polling organizations that put me at 15% or over. I met that. And CNN arbitrarily threw out one of the polls from the approved company's Monmouth in an arbitrary way. So they are keeping me off the stage. But the worrying thing is this. This is the first time in American history that a private for-profit corporation has owned the presidential debates. Biden and President Trump colluded with CNN to exclude the Presidential Debating Commission. Since my uncle's premier debate with Nixon, the first one in history, this has never happened. And the worrying thing is that the DNC and the RNC are putting tens of millions of dollars into CNN. So there's a conflict there. Plus, the CNN announcers on some of the biggest, most monumental decisions during their presidency, like the lockdown of the American public, the CNN announcers were cheerleaders for those lockdowns. That Biden and Trump that shifted $4.3 trillion in wealth to this new oligarchy of billionaires that destroyed the middle class in this country, that shut down 3.3 million businesses with no due process, shut down our churches, made us wear masks. Jake Tapper was cheerleading for that. So do you think he's going to ask them any of the tough questions? Do you think he's going to ask them tough questions?
You know what? I actually do. I think Jake's a great journalist. I worked with him at CNN. I think Dana Bash is too. I think of course they can. I think they'll actually do a very good job. I'm disappointed you're not going to be there, but given you're not going to be there, because I think you should be there, and you would definitely add some spice to it, but given you're not going to be there, who do you think is going to win the debate?
I think, well, I don't like to make predictions, but I would predict that Trump will win because I think Donald Trump is good. He could win a prize for the greatest debater in modern American history, probably since Lincoln Douglas. And I'm not saying that based upon my own assessment. I'm saying that based upon watching him run through 16 Republicans one at a time and just demolish them in his debates. And he has all of these extraordinary techniques. He's extremely entertaining to watch. He has an ability to make up facts and then believe them absolutely and sell them to the crowd. He's just, he's like watching, he's an entertainer. He's a brilliant entertainer and nothing phases him. And he has extraordinary debating techniques. So I don't think it's possible for President Biden to beat him in that debate. And I think a lot of people are going to be watching the debate to see how, to measure some of the questions that people have about the acuity of the mental acuity and the cognitive flexibility of the current president.
If it turns out to be a train wreck for Biden, given how early this debate is being held, way earlier than normal, is it beyond the realms of fantasy that the Democrats may say, we can't possibly go forward with him as the nominee? We're going to have to do something about it and parachute somebody in time for the convention.
I think that's possible. I think if they were, I have no idea. So again, I don't make predictions. But I think if they were going to switch out somebody, the convention would be the place to do it.
Yeah. And if
They have this, they have this super delegates who are in line basically, and they are the ones who would choose the next nominee. So I think that they would probably some of them would welcome that chance.
given how well you've been doing, given your soaring profile, if either President Trump or President Biden were to offer you a job, if they were to win in their administration, would you take it?
Oh, I intend to win the race, Pierce, so I'm not thinking that far ahead.
I knew
and by the way, I'm not looking for a job in government. I'm not, I have a very good life, and I've had plenty of opportunities throughout my life to work in government, including, very, very big jobs in government, presidential appointments, and I've never done it. So it's not something that I'm looking for.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr., brilliant to have you back on Uncensored so soon. Thank you very much.
Pierce, thanks for having me. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. here. Over 70% of Americans want a different choice than Presidents Biden or Trump. They're tired of voting for the lesser of two evils. Presidents Trump and Biden colluded with CNN to block me from representing your voices, but I'm not going to let them silence us. Go to therealdebate.com to watch me answer the same debate questions live. I'm going to be on that debate stage with or without their permission. I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and I approve this message.
And Mr. Kennedy, thank you for doing this. So the first question I had is local in scope. Maine, in the national view, is seen as kind of a vacation land, but in reality, a lot of communities in our state are suffering with the results of deindustrialization. We have a lot of mill towns where the mills have closed, a lot of people in poverty and turning to addiction. So what are your specific economic visions to reverse the course of rural America as it's on right now?
Yeah, I have the kind of a longer term approach, which is ending the addiction to war, unraveling the war machine, which is driving inflation in this country and driving the destruction of the middle class. I'm going to rein in the Fed also, so that the policies of quantitative easing followed by high interest rates, which is used to pump money out of the middle class and equity out of the middle class toward the big investment houses and banks, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and the big banks. We're going to have a rational policy. And I'm going to end the chronic disease epidemic, which is the biggest cost. That's now 5 times our military cost. A lot of people are suffering from chronic disease in Maine. Only 6% of our population had chronic disease when my uncle was president. Today, 60% does. It's costing us $4.3 trillion. Diabetes, for example, which is epidemic in Maine. When I was a kid, a typical pediatrician would see 1 case of diabetes in his lifetime. Today, 1 out of every 3 kids who walks into his office is diabetic or pre-diabetic, and we know why it is. No other country has anything like this. We're mass poisoning our people, and particularly this generation of children, which are all suffering from autoimmune disease, neurological diseases, depression, mental illness, obesity, etc. Suicide is now the second most common death among Americans under 35. Addiction, we killed 106,000 people from overdoses last year. It's double the number of people who died in the 20-year Vietnam War. And we got to start treating this as a crisis. and started healing people. We have a whole generation that's feeling dispossessed, that's alienated, that's marginalized and depressed, and has very little hope for their own future, but also is just disconnected from any feeling of community.
And I want to touch upon what you're saying a little bit about defense and American involvement in foreign wars. You've definitely called for cutting the military budget substantially. You said the military spending is a constant drain on our nation's vitality. What about if Russia does win in Ukraine and Putin continues his mission to recreate the old borders of the Soviet Union because of a lack of American aid? Do you think that would drain our nation's vitality as well?
Well, I don't think Putin wants to conquer Europe. He can barely conquer Ukraine, which is the poorest country in Europe. There is no evidence whatsoever that Putin wants to reestablish the old Soviet borders. Putin was provoked to go into Ukraine. I'm not saying that. I'm not defending Putin. He had other options, but he made it very clear that he wanted to leave Ukraine. And the one thing he asked for is that we would commit not to put NATO into Ukraine. He signed an agreement with President Zelensky in April of 2022, in which Zelensky agreed to not bring NATO in, and Putin began withdrawing his troops. He didn't, in fact, when Donbass and Lugansk voted to join Russia, he said no. Oh, he didn't want them. He wanted them to stay in Ukraine. The only reason that he went in was to try to get an agreement that NATO would not go into Ukraine, and that's understandable. That is a legitimate.
Do you acknowledge that American aid and American military spending is part of the reason that Ukraine, one of the poorest countries in Europe, as you said, is able to defend itself against Russia for as long as it has?
I think without that aid, they would have signed an agreement, and there'd be 600,000 Ukrainian kids who would be alive today, who did not need to die, and Ukraine would be a lot better off because Donbass and Lugansk would still be part of Ukraine, and the Russian troops would not be in the country. And we made them tear up that agreement. Joe Biden sent Boris Johnson over after Zelensky had negotiated a peace agreement, refereed by Naftali Bennett from Israel and by Prime Minister Erdogan from Turkey. They all sat down in Istanbul. They initialed it. Putin initialed it. Zelensky initialed it. Putin was withdrawing all troops from Ukraine. But we wanted that war. And Biden sent Boris Johnson over and forced Zelensky to tear up that agreement. And that's why those 600,000 kids died. They didn't need to. And by the way, my own son fought in Ukraine. He joined the Foreign Legion. He fought in the Kharkiv offensive. And the people that he fought with are now dead. And they didn't need to die. And that was, of course, it's Putin's fault, but it was America's fault too, for insisting stupidly that NATO be pushed into Ukraine. We gave our word in 1992 that would not happen. When Gorbachev dismantled the Soviet Union, the only thing he asked us is we wouldn't, after we put 450,000 troops into Germany and reunited East and West Germany, and the Russians moved out their troops out and let our troops go in. The one thing Gorbachev asked is that we would not move NATO to the east. And we did it anyway. We moved it into 14 countries, 1,000 miles to the east. And the one red line that the Russians always said is you can't move it into Ukraine. We've been invaded 3 times through Ukraine. The last time Hitler killed 1 out of every 7 Russians. We walked away from 2 nuclear weapons treaties with the Soviets, the 2 intermediate missile treaties. And we went and put nuclear-ready Aegis missile systems in Romania and Poland. 12 minutes from Moscow, we could decapitate the entire Soviet leadership in 12 minutes. If we put those same systems in Ukraine, we can do it in 4 minutes. Think about that. When the Russians tried to put missiles in Cuba, we said, that's too close, and we're going to go to war with you if you do it. and we drove them out. And I was, my family was part of that. I remember the missile crisis very well. My uncle solved the missile crisis, and my father met with Ambassador Dobrin, and he explained the reason we put the missiles in Cuba is because you have missiles in Turkey on our border. So my uncle, in a secret agreement, agreed to pull the Jupiter missiles out of Turkey if the Russians would pull their missiles out of Cuba. And we solved it. And we stayed out of Europe with our missile systems for all these decades. And then we had President Trump and President Obama go and put Aegis missile systems right near the Russian border and walk away from the two nuclear weapons treaties. And then the Biden administration insisted on putting NATO in Ukraine, which is a red line for Russia.
Mr. Kennedy, I want to move on to a different topic that has been dominating college campuses when the students were still on campus, which is the rise of anti-Semitism. And I want to go over some comments that you made a year ago. You said COVID-19 is targeted to attack Caucasians and Black people. The people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese. Do you still believe in what you said? And do you acknowledge that that kind of statement falls into a anti-Semitic trope that goes back to the Black Plague?
I mean, the irony is, and at the same time, I'm being called anti-Semitic, which of course is a joke. I'm also being called a Zionist. So somebody's got to make up their mind. All I was doing was quoting an NIH-funded paper that anybody can look up, and I wasn't making something up.
But do you acknowledge that specific trope that Jews are somehow have different immunity than other people is something that has been used by anti-Semitic movements throughout history?
Well, all I was doing was quoting a paper that was funded by the United States government. That's a peer-reviewed publication that said, well, of course, all races are different. There are ethnically targeted bioweapons. I never said that COVID was one of those. What I said about COVID, which I just quoted, the findings of the paper, that showed that certain races were more susceptible because the docking site on the COVID virus that docks with the ACE2 receptors in people's lungs was more compatible with certain races than with others. The races that it was least compatible with were people from Finland. The second most was Ashkenazi Jews. The third most was Chinese nationals. It was most compatible with Blacks, with people from Africa, and with Caucasians. And, this is a scientific study. It's not a racist statement. It's just the truth. And, if you think we shouldn't talk about the truth, and that's, I think that's...
So you stand by your comment. Okay. I just want to move on because we don't have much time. We're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of the Dobbs decision. First, tell me a little bit about your feelings on the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, and what federal restrictions or lack thereof there should be regarding abortion.
I supported Roe v. Wade. I think it should be a woman. Listen, I fought more and harder for medical freedom and bodily autonomy probably than anybody in this country. And I believe that it should be a woman's choice to whether or not to abort her baby. I think every abortion is a tragedy. I think we ought to do as much as we can to avoid abortions, particularly 52% of abortions are, women say that that economics played a role in their decision. And I don't think that should ever be the case. I don't think we should ever that a woman should ever be forced to terminate a pregnancy because of economic considerations. But
what national legislation?
Let me just finish what I'm saying. I think that after the fetus becomes viable outside of the womb, that the state has an escalating interest in protecting that life.
And moving on, to your family. The Kennedys obviously are known for rallying behind campaigns when a member of your family runs for office. What do you think about your messaging has caused your family to choose, or many members of your family to endorse Joe Biden?
Well, I have a big family. I've got 105 cousins and nieces and nephews, and I don't know whether half of them are for me, but it would be something like that. I have many members of the family who are working on my campaign. My cousin Anthony Schreiber is running my Florida operation. But there's other members of my family's very, very close to President Biden. I've known President Biden for 40 years. We have close personal relations. There's 5 members of my family that are working for the administration, and many of them don't agree with me on a number of issues, on censorship. They don't agree with me on Ukraine and other issues as well. And I come from a family where we were raised with the idea that we should be able to debate each other. We were encouraged to debate each other every night at the dinner table, but also that we could debate with passion, with knowledge, but also that we could love each other even when we disagree with each other. And I love my family. I feel loved by them. And I wish the same thing could happen for our country, that we could disagree on issues without hating on each other.
And of course, you're running to win. But if you do take enough of a vote away from either President Biden or former President Trump, and are a major reason that one of them wins, how do you think that would reflect on your legacy?
I'm running for president. There's a lot of people in this country who do not, 80% of the country says they don't want to have to choose between President Biden and President Trump. And I'm giving them another option. I have higher favorability ratings than anybody who's running right now. I am doing better with young people than anybody who's running right now. I'm doing better with independent voters than anybody who's running. And I'm doing better, particularly with people who have not voted in other elections, but they're coming back into the electoral process because they were disgusted. They didn't like having to choose between the lesser of 2 evils. And they're coming back now to vote and vote for me. Right now, just so that you know, our polling shows, which is the best polling on this issue, that I take a slightly larger number of votes away from President Trump and President Biden. President Trump, Biden cannot win the election. According, the biggest poll taken was the Zogby poll, which is 10 times the size of any other poll. And that poll shows that if there's in a 3-way race, if the election happened today, that President Trump wins. If I'm in it, if I get out, President Trump wins 2 extra states, Maine and Virginia. But I pretty much am, poll after poll has shown that large numbers of my supporters are voting for me, who have completely withdrawn from the political process, and they're coming back in to vote for me. And I think they ought to have an alternative choice, but I intend to win this election.
So last question, and it just has to do with trade. Would you call yourself a protectionist, or would you say you're in favor of free trade in the same vein as President Clinton or President Reagan before that?
I would say I'm for fair trade. I think free trade implies that other nations ought to be able to outcompete us by paying low amounts to workers or by cheating on the environmental issues. And I don't think that that's true. So I'm for free markets and fair trade, but not for just unhinged trade, which would provoke and promote a race to bottom, of bad behavior by nations all over the world, and it will export all of our industry, which we've seen happen.
So does that mean you would support something like President Biden's tariffs on Chinese EVs?
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to look at that case by case. That's the only way to do it. It's the only way to do it.
Great. Well, I think that's our time. Thanks so much, Mr. Kennedy. I really appreciate you making the time to do this.
Happy to be with you.
Thank you. And is there anything else you want to add?
No.
Great. Thank you so much. Bye.
It appears that both President Trump and President Biden are afraid to debate me, and their campaigns are colluding with CNN to keep me off the debating stage. Hi, I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and I'm running as an independent candidate for President of the United States. The two other candidates don't agree on much, but they do agree about excluding me from that stage. That's why the Washington Post reported on May 17th that, quote, Biden's advisors quickly let it be known that they had not agreed to any terms that could include Kennedy. The Post also reported that, quote, one of the CNN producers on a Wednesday call with Trump aides had explained at the time that, quote, RFK Jr. will not be on the stage, end quote. While I'm flattered to know that President Biden and President Trump are frightened by the prospect of debating me, shutting me out of that debate makes a mockery of democracy. It's not just about trying to silence me as a candidate. It's also an attempt to stifle the ideas that I represent that both of these candidates would rather not talk about. For example, the bloated $34 trillion national debt, which they both contributed to, the forever wars that they both support, the chronic disease epidemic that is debilitating our children and over which they presided, the toxic polarization in our country which is tearing us apart and which both of them feed upon and profit from, and the corruption of the federal agencies which neither of them knows how to stop, even if they wanted to. President Biden and President Trump know I'll come in with tough questions which neither of them want to answer, and that's why they want to avoid debating me. Whether or not they succeed, I'm going to keep talking about these issues and making them visible to the American people, and I'm never going to back down. What I need right now is a megaphone to broadcast these ideas on and off of the debating stage, and I need your support to get that megaphone. Please donate to my campaign as much as you can today. Let's show the Democrat-Republican duopoly that we're not going to be silenced. The election's only months away, so please donate now. The best basis for determining whether a certain argument is true is to watch it challenged and defended. Inflation is theft. It is a tax on the poor. It's a tax on the working class. Trump and Biden did. They created a billionaire a day for 500 days and shifted $4.3 trillion from the American middle class.
Are you going to be on that debate stage?
You can't just say the Democratic Party and the Republican Party get to choose. You can't do that because those are private clubs. It's a contribution that is unlawful. You look at President Biden, I worry. I think all of us, it's like watching your 5-year-old play on a jungle gym for the first time. You're like, oh my God, I hope, he doesn't fall. Trump in 4 years, he came in and said he was going to balance the budget. He spent $8 trillion, which is more than every president from George Washington to George W. Bush, 283 years of history.
RFK Jr., welcome to the show.
Very good to meet you. Thank you so much for having me, Tom.
It is wonderful. As I was telling you before we started rolling, I've now spent about 30 hours researching you, looking for the smoking gun where you come across crazy, and I haven't found it. So I'm really eager to sit down and hear the vision for America. But I want to start with you. So let me ask, what your uncle, JFK, famously said that the trait that made him, that was his best trait, wasn't courage. It was actually curiosity, because it allowed him to think from his opponent's standpoint. What do you think is your best trait?
Yeah, my uncle was actually met his wife, Jackie, who was then Jackie Bouvier, and she was a reporter. And she did a kind of a man in the street interviews, but she would interview people in Washington, D.C. And her first conversation with him, she asked him what his best quality was, and she expected him to say courage, because he was the only U.S. president who he was a congressman at that point, but he was he'd been a war hero, and he was the only U.S. president to get the Purple Heart. He had a lot of other commendations. He had written a book, a Pulitzer Prize-winning book called Profiles in Courage. So he clearly thought courage was the quality that allowed all the other virtues to function. Mm. But he surprised her when he gave her that answer, that he thought his greatest asset, his greatest virtue was curiosity. And if you study his life, you understand why that is. He understood that if we're going to have peace, which was the critical outcome for his presidency, he told his best friend Ben Bradley. When Ben Bradley asked him, what do you want on your gravestone? He said he kept the peace. That the primary job of a president of the United States was to keep the country out of war. He said that he didn't want African kids, when they heard the United States of America, to think of a man with a gun and a uniform. He wanted them to think of a Peace Corps volunteer. He wanted them to think of the Alliance for Progress, USAID, these programs he created to end run the oligarchies and the military dictatorships and give funnel money directly to the poor and aid in ways that would foster the growth of a middle class, which he thought was critical to a democracy. Hopefully, I have some of that quality. I think it was important for him to be able to put himself in the shoes of his adversaries, and he thought that was critical to the path to peace. And I think that quality is as critical now as ever. I mean, if you ask me kind of what the quality that's kind of got me where I am today, I think I like to think that I have a rational mind and that I have a lot of detachment. That I'm not susceptible to passion or prejudice. That I try to look at problems and understand kind of the most logical way of looking at them, and then be always willing to change your mind about things if the data tells you otherwise. But then I also have kind of an imperviousness to pressure. If I believe something is right, I'll stick with it, and I'm not going to change my mind based upon kind of social punishment, defamations that are applied to me, or marginalization, or any of those. But I will change my mind always if somebody confronts me with facts that are contrary to my worldview.
Do you think that logical approach is the thing that is going to make you effective at being a president in this moment? Because the other two candidates are all about appealing to the emotion.
I think that my sort of capacity to not get swept away by emotions or by ambition is, I think it's a quality that has made me suitable for this time. Because I think we need somebody right now. I mean, one of the big problems that we have, that's just a systemic problem, is this divisiveness and the polarization. And we've always had polarization in our country, but it's aggravated by two things. One is the stratification of our society. So we were the biggest middle-class country in the world, and we had the best social mobility when I was a kid. It was, if you were poor in America, you were more likely to make it into the next echelon or the upper classes than any other Western country, any country in the world. America is an extremely mobile society. If you started out poor, you can make it anywhere. Today, we are the least mobile of any Western democracy. So if you're born poor in this country, you're more likely to stay poor than somebody in Poland or France or Ukraine or wherever. And also, we're seeing the destruction of the middle class. When I was a boy, America had a middle class, and that's why our democracy worked. Right? We had this, the middle class was the greatest economic engine ever, the American middle class, the greatest economic engine ever devised, and it had given us all this wealth. We owned, when my uncle was president, half the wealth on the face of the earth. And you had, all the Americans were in houses, and we had this just explosion of middle class, and that stabilized the country. When you see the middle class, when a country loses its middle class, and you have these big gaps in wealth gaps where you have an oligarchy above, which is what we have now, and widespread poverty below, that's a configuration that is too unstable to sustainably support a democracy, because you end up getting two political parties, and one of those parties is representing the interests of the upper class, keeping their wealth and getting richer. And that's not a good vessel for populism. So they're not telling people that that's what they're up to, but they're using other techniques of propaganda, of lying, of fixing votes or whatever to make sure that people vote, or division, of pointing out scapegoats. And
are you talking about the right or the left right now?
It doesn't matter. If you're in a stratified society, whether it's a communist or whatever it is, where there's widespread poverty below and where there's great wealth above, one of the parties, its function is going to be protecting the assets and the perquisites and the privileges of the upper class. Yep. And then you'll have another party or a lot of parties that are trying to, that are representing poorer people. But usually the upper class gets the military and a lot of the institutions on its side, the press, et cetera, and it can manipulate a lot of levers, and it has to kind of be dishonest about what its objective is. So you get widespread feeling that people have been fooled, and you get these divisions, and that's happening in our country right now. So the polarization is partially a function of the economic stratification, but it's amplified today by social media, because the algorithms, these algorithms, which are self-learning algorithms, the engineers who design those algorithms really don't even understand in many cases how they work anymore, because they're learning themselves. And what they learned is the objective of the algorithm is to keep eyeballs on the site for as long as possible, because that's how revenues are generated by that social media. It turns out that people like to read things that they already believe in. Mm-hmm. So if you're a Republican and Democrat, you're living next door to each other, and you ask the same question of Google, you may get two different answers, because the algorithm is steering to you information that fortifies your worldview, your existing worldview.
It's manipulating you, to be sure. I'm totally on board with that. The thing, though, that I want to anchor this back on is this started from me asking if you having a rational mind is going to be the thing that steers us from that. So you've painted a really good picture of the division, how it happens, you didn't say Gini coefficient, but that idea, as the rich get richer, and there's a bigger divide between the haves and the have-nots, you're headed towards violence, quite frankly, from a historical perspective. But what I want to know is, how are you going to deploy a dispassionate, evidence-based methodology to solving those problems when first you have to win the election against people who are going to be able to speak to the emotional side of people?
Well, yeah, I don't want to. I don't want to, paint a picture of myself as kind of a bloodless technocrat. I feel like my whole life has been about empathy and and trying to understand people. So, but I think it's important for particularly. What I really was saying is that's kind of how I ended up where I am now. I became kind of a social critic of a bureaucracy that is corrupt and that is twisting science and is twisting facts and distorting facts, and that I feel like I have a clear view of what I have a rational mind, so I'm looking at truth and I'm seeing how it's being deliberately and systematically distorted by powerful entities, whether it's the press, and that our country really is no longer living up to its ideals. I mean, we've been promoting regime change abroad and undemocratic forces and suppressing democracy abroad, and the same thing at the same time has been happening here at home. We've really lost a lot of the traditional indicia of democracy. Sure, we have elections still, but Russia has elections, Iran has elections, China has elections, and you look at our country and say, are we really a democracy anymore? Or are we really an oligarchy or even a plutocracy or a corporate kleptocracy where, the wealth and corporations are really have the power to dictate policy and that, regular Americans have almost no say in the political process. And, and then also, we have a government now that's doing things that the American, Constitution that are abhorrent to our Constitution. It's doing censorship. It's doing surveillance. It's doing, it's doing sort of compliance exercises that are very, very anti-democratic. And I feel like I have, for one reason or another, that I have clarity about that, and I'm not. It sounds kind of vain to say that I have a rational mind and, other people are irrational. And I'm not trying to say that, but I think I have, I feel like I have a really clear vision about what this country is supposed to look like and what the values that, I was raised with and that we've departed from that vision and those values.
All right, that is very much what I want to map out in this conversation. But I really do want to get into this idea. One, I would just say, as somebody who is a voter and could potentially vote for you, I love that you're open-minded. I love that you don't overstep and get super aggressive. But if you believe that part of what makes you worthy of this role is that you can think through these problems better than somebody else, make as bold of a claim as you want, and then just demonstrate to me that you can back it up. And so one of the things that drives me mad as somebody on the outside looking at your candidacy, and I am in search of the best ideas. That's it. I just want to know what's true. I want to know what's effective. And when people are trying to dismiss you because they think that you're wrong, but instead of debating the ideas, they just dismiss you, it makes me distrust them in a simple sentence. I want to see you be able to debate these ideas with the people that are the recognized experts, so that every time I see you get into a debate on a topic, I can tell that there's layers and layers and layers of data points, assumptions that your conclusion is built on. I don't know if your conclusions are right. And that's why I want to see you collide with people, but people won't collide with you. So one, why is that? And since we're filming this before the presidential debate, are you going to be on that debate stage?
Well, of course, I'd like to be on the debate stage. The debating commission, if the traditional commission that's been used for the past 30 years was running the debate, I believe I'd be on the debate stage. But the both the Biden and Trump campaign have said that they're not going to use the Presidential Debating Commission, and they made a side deal with CNN. And we think the side deal is illegal, and we've asked the FEC to take action, and we've also filed our own lawsuit against it. Under FEC rules, and this gets into the weeds. It's not a particularly great story, but under FEC rules, if you don't have neutral pre-existing criteria for determining who will be on the debate stage, and you just choose the two people that you want to debate and exclude everybody else, it's an illegal campaign contribution. And it's the same thing, essentially, that got Michael Cohen locked in jail. It's a contribution that is unlawful. So the FEC rules specifically say you cannot make a debating you cannot base who is going to participate in the debate based upon party affiliation. You can't just say the Democratic Party and the Republican Party get to choose. You can't do that because those are private clubs. They're not in our Constitution. They're just private businesses. And so that's an illegal contribution. And you also can't, the person who's staging the debate, if it's a network, can't collude with the two political parties to exclude adversaries. And that, apparently, according to the Washington Post, is exactly what happened. President Biden's team got on the phone with CNN and said, you got to have rules that keep Kennedy off the stage. So now, even if CNN relented and said, okay, you can get on the stage, there's no guarantee that either President Trump or President Biden would show up for the debate. So I don't have any control over it. I mean, I think it's good for our country if they include me. I think it will be good for CNN and its advertising revenues too, because I think more people will tune in. But I can't say whether that's going to happen or whether it's not going to happen.
What do you think about the general idea in culture right now of somebody is undebatable, that they're just so far off the mark that we should completely ignore their ideas? Do you think that from a protecting our democracy standpoint, from moving science forward standpoint, from handling something like COVID better standpoint, is that a wise way to move forward?
Well, I would say that, I think that all ideas should be heard. There may be ideas that are, so crazy and so obviously baseless that and indefensible that there may be some red line at some point where you say that is just too marginalized and baseless a notion. But generally speaking, I think democracy functions and our country is strong because of the free flow of information. And that, as you just pointed out, you don't really, you don't have any basis. The best basis for determining whether a certain argument is true is to watch it challenged and defended. And so I think that's the healthy way to, and the democratic way to make a determination. I don't think people put me in that category that you just described. They say my ideas are so insane that the public shouldn't even hear them. And but then if you ask them which of my ideas are so insane, they can't really name them, except they'll say things that they think I believe that I never said, because there's so many distortions about what I have said and what I haven't said. And but I don't think there's anything I say that, most 99% of Americans would say, oh, that sounds pretty common sense. But there's a lot of pejoratives applied to me that I'm anti-vax, not true. that I'm anti-science, that I'm racist, that I'm anti-Semitic, and all of these are, inventions of people who want to silence me. And if you actually ask them, I'm a conspiracy theorist, what is the conspiracy that I actually said that you think is a conspiracy?
That one's starting to become a compliment at this point. Like
the
number of conspiracies, but people saying that you're outright lying. That's one that I've heard a lot when you start going into, and I am not qualified to debate on the vaccines, but as you start to wade into those waters to see what people say about you, it's just that. Like, it's very rare.
They'll say I'm
lying,
details. But then, nobody really asks the next question about what? Show me the statement that he made that is actually untrue, because they had these. We found out they have had these debates quietly at Facebook, etc. And they had to make up a new, because they realized, like, Instagram took me down for misinformation, for lying, and I had almost a million followers. And they said it was because I was promoting misinformation and lies. And then when we asked them, can you show one post that I've made that is actually factually incorrect, they are unable to do it, because everything I posted was either cited or sourced to either a peer-reviewed publication or a government database. And so,
in today's volatile and unpredictable economic climate, the challenge of managing your monthly expenses is real, especially with high interest debt eating away at any chance of reaching your financial goals. And if this sounds like you, I recommend that you reach out to American Financing if you're in the market to refinance your home. On average, American Financing customers save $854 per month, the equivalent to receiving a $10,000 annual raise. The process of American Financial is straightforward, quick, it's very efficient. You can close your loan in as little as 10 days, and it costs nothing to see how much they can save you. Call 800-852-2010. Again, that's 800-852-2010, or go to americanfinancing.net/impact. For terms and conditions, use 182-334 at nmlsconsumeraccess.org. I don't know about you guys, but everything that I do, I want to be the absolute best at. And that means that I have to be extremely efficient with my time and think a lot about what I eat so that I can cognitively optimize my way to success. Save all of your precious minutes and skip all the meal planning, shopping, and most of the prep work that it normally takes to eat healthy with America's #1 meal kit, HelloFresh. HelloFresh makes it easy and efficient to eat delicious meals, and everything is delivered directly to your door. All you have to do is open your box and get cooking. I cannot tell you how obsessed I am that it only takes a few minutes to go from I'm hungry to I'm actually chewing. That is a big deal for me, especially when it comes to healthy food. Just go to hellofresh.com/impactapps and you will get free appetizers for life. One appetizer item per box while subscription is active. That's free appetizers for life at hellofresh.com/impactapps. That's one thing I've heard you say a lot. And what my PSA to the world would be to hear that and say, okay, this conversation, even the way that it's playing out now, is just going to be another round of sound bites. The only way for the American people to figure out what's going on is to have these ideas battled out in a long form public debate. Let's find out how much you really know about this. So that the general public can get elected. But the part that this becomes a PSA, from my perspective, is we are being treated like we are too dumb to understand the information, and therefore misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, which definitionally is true, but we're worried that it might cause a problem, so we still don't want it to get out to you. That to me is so outrageous. So what I would love to see people do is say, once an idea hits a certain level of cultural awareness, it's time to be debated. Even if the experts are like, oh, this is junk, this is throwaway. I think that I'll say within my world, they have a moral obligation to do it. I get that's going to be very controversial, and I don't want to lose people just on that. But for the public good, somebody needs to step up and spend the time debating that. And that if we don't do that, then we get these conversations where one media outlet just throws out their quips, you throw out yours, and then we never find out like what side can withstand scrutiny.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. And what I've said is I'll debate anybody on any of these issues. I think that's absolutely critical that we have those kind of debates, and that, again, I think the idea of protecting the public from dangerous ideas is not something that should be permissible in a democracy. And, there's a lot of stuff that I would characterize as kind of borderline conspiracy theories, stuff about, I have no idea whether UFOs exist, right? I don't have any idea. I just don't have any information on them, but I don't think automatically that we shouldn't be hearing about that, right? Or whether 9/11 whether there was something screwy about that. I think we should be talking about it. And even on the election, issues, it's verboten to say that, the election was fixed. Well, in 2001, almost every Democrat believed that the election was fixed, that, Gore won the presidency and that he was excluded. In 2004, I wrote a an award-winning article for Rolling Stone saying that election, that there had been 6 counties that had been stolen in Colorado, and I gave chapter and verse about why I believe that, and and a lot of people believed it then, and I still believe it today. In 2016, people believe that Bernie Sanders got, that the election was fixed against them, and in 2020, Hillary Clinton publicly says that election was stolen from her. So, the thing, we should fix the electoral system in this country so nobody believes that at all. We put a man on the moon. We have ATMs on every block and, in every city in this country, and they never make mistakes. We have they never give you too much money, right? We can make a machine that can count. Las Vegas proves that. There's the slot machines never pay you too much. And then you can have a paper ballot so that if people have doubts about the machines, because machines can get hacked, you ought to be able to do a hand count, even a very, very low threshold, so that we should be able to solve those problems. But I don't think that, we should be making, I believe that Biden won the election, but I don't believe that we should be vilifying and making pariahs and marginalizing and ridiculing the people on the other side who say he didn't. They're not attacking democracy. We ought to be able to answer their questions point by point, and those debates need to take place in a democracy, and hopefully they need to take place in a way that's congenial and respectful and not, filled with hatred and vitriol and poison. We ought to be able to just have we ought to have a debate. That's what gives democracy its power, is that, the policies that ultimately, prevail in a democracy are annealed first in a furnace of debate. And the idea is that that can triumph in that marketplace of ideas. They're the ones that rise to the top and become policies. And that's the big advantage that democracy has on totalitarian systems. Totalitarian system is a much more efficient system. You don't have you got one guy at the top saying, and from being a business guy, right? You wouldn't want it to, you could not have made all the tons of money that you've made if everything was done by a committee. And so totalitarian systems are much more efficient. They're much more streamlined. They're much quicker to react. And the framers of the Constitution knew that, but they thought democracy over the long run would have an advantage because the debates would give us, it's a marketplace. The same reason China does great at home because it can select this business, it selects winners and losers. So it can dominate its own market. But I'm not scared of competing with China elsewhere in the world because we have free market system, or at least we did in the past. And that's going to eliminate the efficiencies over long term much more efficiently. Like the government couldn't have created Facebook. The government couldn't have alone created, these other, billion-dollar companies. You need people you need a marketplace. And we need that marketplace for ideas too. So if our democracy is going to continue to function. And I'll debate anybody on any statement I made. And, we did this when I was on Joe Rogan. He had Peter Hotez, who's this, what I would call a kind of a corrupt scientist who's, an insider in the, we call him biostitutes. He's an insider in the pharmaceutical industry. And he was sitting on the sidelines saying I was lying about all these things. And Joe Rogan said, "Would you debate him?" And I said, "I'll debate him anytime, anywhere." And Joe Rogan, I think, offered him $100,000, and then David Sachs.
The total got up high.
I think it was 2.6 million in the end, or something like that.
It's bananas, and he still passed.
And he wouldn't do it. So that tells you something.
Aggressively.
Right? It tells you something that he doesn't feel confident enough in his ideas that he can defend them. And I can be wrong about stuff, but I hope, right? I have lots of track record of doing this. And if somebody calls me out because I got something wrong, that my reaction to that is to go back and fix it and say, yeah, I got that wrong, and here's the right. Thanks for pointing that out. In this book, The Real Anthony Fauci, I say in the beginning, there's 2,200 footnotes in there, and there's a lot of factual assertions. And I invite people, and we put what do you call the QR code next to each one so you can look up my source while you're reading. And
that's really smart.
Yeah, so that people can check me immediately. So, and I invite people in the first page of this book, I say, if you find an error in this book, please tell us about it, because we ended up with like 30 editions of that book. And anytime there's a new edition, I can correct an error. So that's what you do with errors. When you're wrong, you acknowledge it, you correct it, and then you keep going. But so I think that is the way that it's supposed to operate, and that's the way I operate. I'm not going to stand on a fact that is wrong, that have been shown that it's wrong.
Yeah, here's an idea that I think ends up leading people to weird places is they are not recognizing the utility of truth. And so truth is hard to identify. There's no question about that. But once you understand that your brain is a prediction engine, the beliefs that you hold about what is true will allow you to accurately predict the outcome of your behaviors. If your beliefs are close to ground truth, then you'll get the outcome you expect. And if you don't, then something about your belief system is broken. If you update it, now you can get closer to what you were trying to get. And once people understand the utility of that, if they can separate their ego away from being right and moving it over to being effective. So, hey, I don't value myself for being right. I value myself for identifying the right answer and putting that into my thought process so that I can be more effective in something. So this brings up the whole idea of value system, which I think is incredibly important. Now, I can't remember if it was
I by the way, I can't improve on that explanation about why we should be seeking truth.
Yeah, it is literally just getting to effectively the scientific method. Like you're just trying to figure out, I expect to get this result. I'm going to try a thing. Did I get the result? No.
And you validate it.
Exactly.
And you know, if you believe in empiricism, if you believe in the scientific method, if you believe in objective truths, then, you know, life should be just a search for existential truths. That's why we're here. That's what God wants us to be doing, you know, to be looking for truth you know, that what right now, the role of the government in so many instances is to confuse people about it and to distort the truth and to, in order to make way for power and corporate profits and to advance the mercantile interests of these, you know, the corporations that they regulate. And you have time and again when I talk about debating people and getting to the truth, people say to me, well, is there really any truth? Right? And they ask that question, and you're like, that's how confused people are, is that they don't even believe that there's objective truth anymore.
I will give them that the truth is so hard to ascertain that there is a real thing. So I don't know if you know Ben Shapiro, of course, you've been on his show. So Ben Shapiro has the very famous and very funny statement that facts don't care about your feelings. But the reality is your feelings don't care about facts, and most people are guided by their feelings. And so if something feels right, then they just believe that it is true. And so they don't have any mechanism by which they check it to see, is this belief helping me or not helping me? And that's where I think this breaks down, because so many, again, going back to values, which I really want to hear you speak on, people have built a value system that says be right, be better, be faster, be stronger, not be the learner. Don't worry about being right. Worry about having the right answer, that you should be driving towards goals that are honorable. And so now if we're trying to get goals that are honorable, that sort of sneaks in the idea of, well, we should do that efficiently. And so now how do we efficiently achieve goals that are honorable, which I imagine your platform is going to be chock full of them. But to set the stage for that, I can't remember if it was your dad or your uncle, but one of them said that physical courage is amazing, but there's nothing more difficult or more important than moral courage. So your dad was assassinated for his political beliefs. Your uncle was assassinated for his political beliefs. Your character has been assassinated over and over. Since declaring that you're running for president, you've had your house broken into. I mean, just like on the list goes. What is writing in your value system that makes you keep marching forward?
I mean, I think my dad and his parents, raised us in this, with these ideas of part of it was just the Catholicism that, we read the lives of the saints, and, at the highest calling was people who, the martyrs who stood up for what they believed in and died, and that's, and died for that belief. So, and then, my father, after my uncle's death particularly, became very enthralled with the Greeks, with Edith Hamilton. He, wrote the kind of the seminal book on Greek mythology, and he read Aeschylus, he read Plato, he read, all of the plays and the poems of ancient Greek, and the stories. And those are all about this kind of the elevation of the American, of the human character through heroism, through, standing for something that you believe in. I've told this story on the Lex Fridman show, that my dad gave me a book a couple of weeks before he died, which was a book by Camus, and it's called The Plague. And my dad gave me books all the time and poems and asked me to read them. when he gave me this book, he told me that he wanted me to read it with this kind of special intensity. And then after he died, I didn't read it before he died, but after he died, it became important for me to read it. So I did, and I read it a number of times to try to unlock, whatever it was that he was telling. That was the last thing that he sort of request that he made of me. Oh, it had, it was imbued with kind of special importance in my mind. And the book is about a doctor in a plague-ridden city in North Africa. It's like Algeria, Tunisia. It never says, and it doesn't say what the disease is, but the city is under quarantine. Nobody can go in and out. And the plague has a very high infection fatality rate, so a lot of people are dying. And it's the story told through the perspective of a doctor who is kind of terrified. He's sitting in his room, and he knows that if he goes out and treats people, that there's probably almost nothing he can do because nobody knows how to treat the disease. It's highly contagious. So the contact that he has from treating people is likely to infect him, and he's likely to die. And, he's thinking, if I just sit this out in here, I may be able to make it through, and then I can do good things with the rest of my life. But in the end, he goes out and he does his duty. And even consoling people and comforting them in their last hours, he gets meaning in his life from that. And Camus was an existentialist, and he was kind of a legatee of the Stoic tradition. And the Stoics were, and my father really embraced Stoicism. Their hero was Sisyphus. He was the iconic hero of Stoicism. And Sisyphus was a hero who was cursed by the gods to push a boulder up a hill. He pushed it up all day long, get to the top of the hill. His objective was to push it over the other side, but he never quite makes it to the top. When he gets close to the summit, it always rolls back on him, and it mangles him on the way down. And then he has to limp down the hill, and all night long he gets to the bottom. And then he starts a new day pushing it up again. And in the view of most people who hear that story, he is a cursed man who must be miserable, because it's a miserable eternal task to do this forever. But in the view of the Stoics, Sisyphus was a happy man, because he knew what his duty was, and he was performing it, and he was putting his shoulder to the stone. And, I think I picked up a lot of that from my father, that, the world is supposed to be about struggle, that pain is the touchstone to spiritual growth, that pain, that hard work, that self-discipline is the objective. Ultimately, it's our path to truth, to God, to enlightenment. And then I also just had the example that everybody that I admire in my life, all the heroes that I had from the past, whether it was it was Charles Darwin or Alexander the Great or St. Francis of Assisi or St. Augustine, all of them went through a dark night of the soul when the whole world turned against them, and they lost all their friends. They lost the respect of their communities. They lost all of the conventional, accoutrements of success, and in the material world. And they had to be alone for a period of time. And, it's called the dark night of the soul. And when, but that's kind of that is the payment for a meaningful life. So the fact that I had a lot of family turn against me, and friends turn against me, and and the press and the media and all of these great political contacts that I've made through 40 years of life, where I could pick up the phone and call any congressman or even the president of the United States, and all of that disappeared, or any CEO in this country, and all of that went away. But I don't feel that I need to spend a lot of time grieving or mourning that, because that's just part of my path. That is, I'm supposed to push this stone up this hill, and I feel like I know what I'm supposed to do. I have a real clarity and certainty that what I'm doing now is what I'm supposed to be doing, and that was not getting very much validation in the beginning, but I get that validation from the places I need it, from my wife, from my children, and then from little voices that are talking all the time. It may be just somebody, a friend that I haven't seen in 20 years, who calls me up and says, I love what you're doing. And somebody, the other day sent me somebody I haven't seen in 40 years. A person who was a friend of the wife of a friend of my mom's. He was the coach of the U.S. ski team, and she sent me a picture of herself. I haven't seen this woman in 40 years, sitting at a table with the Kennedy sign on it, right? And then people who come up and say, I'd withdrawn from politics, and you're giving me hope. Young people who come up to me every day and say, I had no hope, and now I got hope. So now I'm getting that kind of validation. But I think for a long time I was getting almost no validation, but I had the internal clarity that I knew what I was doing was important.
What exactly are you doing? So obviously running for president, but I mean, when you get the job, what exactly do you want to accomplish to feel like I got the boulder up and over the hill?
I think I will go into office with a clearer idea of what my agenda is than any president for, probably since Richard Nixon or, my uncle. I think there's probably Clinton went in with an idea, a really clear idea, but I have a very clear idea of what I want to do. I know how to unravel the corporate corruption, the agencies. So, how do I dismantle this corrupt merger of state and corporate power and make government start telling the truth to people? In my first day in office, I'm going to issue an executive order saying any government official who lies for any reason to the American public will immediately lose their job, right? And just say, if you're lying, you're unemployed. Or if we can't sue you or fire you because of civil service, you're going to get a posting in Anchorage, right? And just be ruthless about about making our country a moral entity again, right? And dismantling the war machine, getting us out of Ukraine, getting and solving that. And making peace there, and trying to then, there's so many issues now that are critical in foreign policy. We need to deal with the rise of AI, the threat that makes sure that AI makes the world more democratic, that it makes us more efficient, that it makes us healthier, that it gives people control of their government and not the opposite, that it makes us sicker and gives the government, allows government to make slaves of us all. It can go either way.
All right, I think this is a great one to hear how your logical mind is going to approach that. So,
well, I can't tell you the details about how I'm going to approach that. I can tell you that I know what the end point has to be, and that I understand the huge perils of AI and the huge promise of it. I also understand the complexity that you can't overregulate it in this country because we can't afford to drive it away. So I want this country to be the hub of AI. I want us to be the hub of blockchain. You know, we have an administration right now that is making war on blockchain. In the last 2 years, there's been 1,200 cryptocurrencies registered in Switzerland. The capitalization of those is $360 billion. And all the entrepreneurs are being driven to, you know, Geneva and to Singapore and to China and to Iran and, you know, and to Dubai and Qatar. And those, we want those entrepreneurs here in this country. The only way out of the $34 trillion debt, we cannot cut our way out of that debt. I'm going to make the cuts in the military. I'm going to make the cuts in chronic disease, but you cannot. $34 trillion right now. We spend more. Last year, we spent $1.3 trillion servicing the debt. So that's the cost of paying the interest on the debt. It's more than our total military budget, including the Department of Energy and, you know, Veterans Affairs and you know, the national security agencies. And it's about 8% of our GDP. So, and it's accelerating. It's gone from, you know, the debt, the additional debt has gone from 2% to 8% of our GDP. Within 5 years, 50 cents out of every dollar we collect in taxes is going to go to servicing the debt. In 10 years, 100%. This is existential.
Literally.
And we're past the point where we can cut our way out of it. What we need to do is we need to grow our way out of it. We need to grow our economy so that the debt gets proportionally smaller. And so we need to do cuts enough to balance the budget, but then we need to take that money and invest it in things that are going to grow our economy. You know, if we, for example, every $1 million we spend on weapons creates 2 jobs. Every $1 million that we spend on childcare creates 22 new jobs. So every decision I make as president is going to be, if I'm going to spend money, how many jobs are we going to create? How much wealth is it going to create for our country? That's the only thing I'm focusing on. How do we rebuild the American middle class? And but we can't just do it through cutting and reinvesting. We need new industries, and we need industries that are going to explode the same way that Silicon Valley exploded and got us out of that jam. And though the 2 most obvious industries for doing that are AI and blockchain. So, you know I can't tell you how I'm going to do it. I can tell you I'm going to bring the smartest people in the world together, not the big shots who are going to try to, you know, manipulate it so they own it. But people from every strata who can come in and meet with me and talk with me and figure out a way. And also, we need to be talking to President Xi in China. We need to be talking to Ahmadinejad in Iran. We need to be talking to Putin. We need to be talking to Israel and all these other places about how do we regulate this globally, because it's going to happen, and we can no longer afford to be, you know, at war with other nations all the time. We need to figure out there are greater threats now to all of humanity than one nation against another. There's existential threats to humanity, and you know, AI is one of them. Nuclear proliferation is another. Bioweapons proliferation, particularly when it's married to AI, is really terrifying, and the barriers for entry are getting lower and lower every year. So you're going to be able to make, you know, lethal bioweapons in your garage that could wipe out a big part of humanity. So.
All right, you laid a lot of ideas on the table. I want to start putting like a real fine point on some of these. So the fact, if I'm tracking your logic well, please tell me if I get anything wrong, but you understand that the debt is absolutely untenable. We're going to be spending basically every tax dollar in the not too distant future is going to go just to servicing the debt. If interest rates go up, then it gets
it's
even worse.
10 years. if we stay on the current track. But if interest rates rise, it's a lot faster than that. So, you know,
so
and the interest rates are going to rise. You know, yesterday, 2 days ago, the Saudis got off of the petrodollar.
Yeah.
And you see the rise of BRICS, and that's going to drive a rise in interest rates ultimately that we have no control over. So if people start walking away from the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency, as a global safe haven, as a global trade currency, if that happens, that this will be accelerated to, you know, very short amount of time.
If you're tired of trying to find the real truth, you have to strive to tell whether the news that you're getting is actual real reporting, biased narratives, trolling, selective reporting, whatever the case may be, then you need to be using ground news. Ground News compiles stories from across the global political spectrum, giving you every angle so that you can get the full picture and aren't being blindsided. I especially like their election page where you can learn more about candidates, sort news coverage by key voting issues, and get a specific election-related blind spot feed to make sure you're not missing out on important stories. Go to ground.news/Tom or use the link in the video description to subscribe today. If you sign up through my link, you'll get 40% off the same Vantage plan I use to get unlimited access to all their features. I really like Ground News. I think you guys are going to love it. They are doing important work, and I hope you're going to check them out and stay informed and get rid of your blind spots. And this is a great way to do it with Ground News. How often are you checking your credit score, afraid of identity theft or account breaches? We all use the internet every single day for important things like personal banking and remote work, so why not protect yourself with our sponsor, Aura? Aura is an all-in-one cybersecurity service that keeps you safe online. Aura identifies data brokers exposing your info and submits opt-out requests on your behalf. Aura also monitors your credit, tracks your passwords for data breaches, and secures your online activity with VPN and anti-malware protection. You can try Aura for free for 2 weeks by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code. Yeah. So longtime listeners of my show will know that my thoughts are that's just a question of when, it's not if.
Yeah.
It has happened every single time an empire has arisen throughout all of human history. Ray Dalio does a tremendous breakdown on this. So that's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So tracking that, I think that's super smart. You know that we're going to have to innovate our way out of this. The question is, I know, and I think it would be strange to expect you to know exactly who you're going to put in place and how you're going to pull it off. But do you have a hypothesis about what it is that creates the environment in which innovation can flourish? Because the first thing you've said today that made me nervous is that with government spending, you're going to ask how many jobs do I create, which then I just hear government gets bigger, which is certainly not the song I'm singing.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying I'm going to do.
So
I'm going to increase government spending, but I'm going to say every dollar that the government spends is about, you know, has to be about creating jobs and creating wealth and
creating private jobs.
Yeah, private jobs, creating opportunity, an ecosystem that, you know, that is going to return the middle class and reindustrialize our country.
What's the most effective historical system that we can look to that did that you think has a shot in some similar form today?
Well, I mean, the historic system was to have a base currency that you couldn't, you know, print fiat currency. But fiat currency had to be developed in order to pay for wars. And, you know, there's good reasons to do it, you know, there's some good reasons that you want a limited fiat currency, but like you say, every empire, this is the end of it, right? And the overextension of the military abroad. You know, there's a historian called Paul Kennedy, who's an iconic historian at Yale, and he's written this brilliant analysis of, it's called The Rise and Fall of the Great Empires. It looks at all the great empires over the past 500 years, the Spanish Empire, the British Empire, you know, all of them. and every one of them died because of the overextension of the military abroad, the printing of the money to pay for that, and then just being crushed with the debt of that, and that's exactly what we're doing here right now. And we've got to wind back. We've got to realize that we're no longer live in a unipolar world. We have to recognize a reality that we live in a multipolar world, and there's going to be we're going to be one among many, and that doesn't mean that we're going to diminish our country. It actually is a huge opportunity for us to reestablish America as a moral authority and as a leader in the world. People want American leadership; they don't want bullying. They know the difference, and we need to. Our military budget right now is based, it's not about self-defense. It's not about defending the homeland. It's about dominating the globe. We have 800 bases abroad. The Russians have 1.5. The Chinese have 1. And these expenditures are about domination, about creating a hegemon and the illusion that we are the only power in the world. And it's not working anymore. When we apply sanctions, people laugh at us. The Russians, because of our sanctions, have the strongest economy that they've ever had. They're immune to sanctions now. Putin's more popular than he was when we started attacking. When we attack a country, they get stronger. And it's been catastrophic for our country. And when we stop doing that and we scale back our military and start projecting economic power abroad rather than military power, I don't think we should withdraw from the world. I think we should re-engage as an economic power, and that plays to our strength, because we can. Right now we've spent $8 trillion over the past 20 years since 9/11. We've spent $8 trillion on regime change wars. Right? And every country that we've made war in is worse off than we found it. We say we're extending democracy. That hasn't happened. I'll give you an example of Iraq. We spent $3.6 trillion in Iraq. Today, Iraq is worse off than we found it. We killed more Iraqis than Saddam Hussein. Iraq is not even a country anymore. It's just an incoherent battle between Sunni and Shia death squads. Iraq is now it's in a proxy posture to Iran, which is exactly the foreign policy outcome that we've been trying to avoid for 20 years. We created ISIS. We drove 4 million immigrants up into Europe, and we destabilized every democracy in Europe. Brexit is a direct result of a straight line of the Iraq war and the Syrian spillover war. So that's what we got for that money, $8 trillion. During that same period, China spent $8 trillion. We spent $8 trillion bombing bridges, ports, schools, airports, roads. China spent $8 trillion building them, and it made friends across the globe. We made enemies. It strengthened its currency, which is now they're moving the yuan to a global trade currency, and people are welcoming it. And China's now the principal creditor in almost every nation in Latin America and every nation in Africa. And, we're hated all around the world. And people don't want us as a partner because we're a bully on the playground. But I'm not scared, and China doesn't want a war with us, a hot war. So they spend a quarter to a third on their military that we spend. They don't want a war with us. They want competition, they want domination, but they want it on economic landscapes, and I'm not scared of that. And I think that plays to America's strengths, because we can outcompete them in all of these sectors if we project economic power abroad rather than military power. And this one my uncle did, and he did it very successfully.
What does the plan look like? What does the plan look like?
Well, the plan is to cut, during my first 4 years in office, to cut the military in half. And that cuts it back in real dollars to what we call the Eisenhower minimum, which was the budget in proportion, in 2023 dollars, the same amount being spent as we were spending during the height of the Cold War. Okay, this is the height of the Cold War. Why do we need to be spending more than that? So, then we were promised in '92 that it was going to be cut from $600 billion to the military budget to $200 billion, and we were going to get a peace dividend. And of course, that never showed up. Instead, we raised it to now, what it is. It's not in real dollars. It's about $950 billion, the straight military budget. But when you add in the NSA and the DOE, it's about $1.3 trillion. And so I'm going to cut the straight military budget from 950 to about 500 during my first 4 years, and then continue to look for cuts thereafter. And we're going to end up with a stronger, more effective military. We're going to end up with more targeted military, and one that's much more efficient around the world. But we don't need to be the policeman of the globe, and we've got to relinquish that job, and we got to let other countries, we got to stop overthrowing democracies, we got to stop murdering public officials, we got to start allowing other countries to govern themselves without our coercion. And it's going to strengthen us in every way around the globe. We're going to be a stronger country. We're going to restore our status as the moral authority around the world. And we're going to be a lot richer at home. The real strength of a country comes from a healthy population, from a robust economy, from, strong economy at home. That's where the real national strength comes from, and we're hollowed out now. A strong middle class and a sense of mission and purpose. That's we're sick. We're the sickest country in the world. We have the highest chronic disease burden in the world. We have addiction crisis. We have suicide. We have mental illness crisis. We have a whole population that's obese, that is depressed, that is alienated. We got a generation of kids coming up, 60% of them have chronic disease. They're plagued by, and none of them are ever going to get in a house. And, you watch the demoralization that happens then. It's immoral what we're doing. We're borrowing money to pay the interest on the debt. That is a sin. That is a moral issue. The fact
I want you to explain
the fact that our children are going to live worse than we did. That is
why
immoral.
is that tied to the debt? Most people are not going to understand that.
What?
People will not understand how that's tied to the debt.
What?
So that people don't understand how debt is stealing from your children. That doesn't compute for them. Walk people through how.
Because inflation is a way when you just print money. And then, our money, most nations that did what we did, which is just to print money as much as they wanted, to overspend.
Can you explain to people what money printing actually is? You don't need to give them the mechanism, but most people do not understand. I'm going to call it theft. I'll be super curious.
It's theft. Of course it's
there
theft.
We go.
It's theft from anybody who has a fixed income, anybody who has sort of fixed, it depends on a salary or Social Security or whatever, that money is inflation is theft. It is a tax on the poor. It's a tax on the working class, and that money is sent upwards. And that's why we have this new oligarchy of billionaires. And the worst part is when they did it, the coup de grace to the American middle class was during the COVID lockdowns that Trump and Biden did. They created a billionaire a day for 500 days and shifted $4.3 trillion from the American middle class to this new kleptocracy that we have, right? And it's theft. So normally, if if you had a base currency, which is what our currency used to be, it used to be gold, okay? And for every dollar that you spent, it was redeemable. You could go redeem that in coin. Either get 4 quarters that were actual real silver, or you could get gold or whatever from Fort Knox. And the country legally kept a reserve that was equivalent to the money that was being printed. So the money was represented, each dollar represented a real asset that had a true value, which was the gold at Fort Knox.
It was a finite supply. There was no way to
there was a
print
finite
more
supply.
gold, so that's
Right.
that.
So, so we changed that. And, we in a number of times. I mean, we created the Fed in 1913, and then and then the Bretton Woods Conference in 1972. We completely detached our money from the gold supply. So the nations that borrowed American dollars could no longer redeem them in gold. They just could redeem them in treasury bonds or more dollars. And that was really the start of the crisis, because if you're a government and you want to make war, there's lots of pressure on our government to make war all the time, because, the people who are donating to the political parties are the biggest donors, are like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, and they own the military contractors. They own the big engineering firms that get to rebuild these countries afterward, like Bechtel or whatever. They own Northrop Grumman and, Lockheed Martin and Boeing and all the other big military contractors. So they're pressuring Congress to keep us in a constant state of war. But the only way under the old system, when you didn't have fiat currency, the politicians would have to go to the public and say, we want to make war on Saddam Hussein. It's going to cost $3.6 trillion. We want Congress to approve it. And, we're going to tell you this is what it costs. And we're going to have to, that means that a lot of you are not going to be able to pay your mortgage. You're going to have to, make big sacrifices. You're not going to be able to send your kids to as great a school. This is money that's actually being taken from you in taxes up front. And guess what? There would be no wars, because nobody would approve it.
Yeah.
Now that we have these wars, because they don't ever have to do that. They don't even have to go to Congress to get the wars approved now. They just start a war. They send the money over. They get the press all on their side, and they invent a supervillain, and we have these comic book contests, and it's us to the rescue, and it's and they spend all the money, and they just print new money to pay for it. Well, that money then, because they're printing money, the money that you own, it's not finite anymore, as you pointed out. It's endless. And every dollar they print diminishes the dollar that are in your pocket. Right now, most countries could not do what we've been doing, which is to print this vast amount of money and then also have trade deficits where there's much more money going out, much more goods coming into this country. We're using that money to buy goods from other countries because we don't produce anything anymore. And we were a trade surplus until the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War, in order to pay for the Vietnam War, Nixon created the Bretton Woods Conference and detached the dollar from gold, because that was the only way they could pay for that war. And so since then, because we are the global reserve currency and we are, regarded as a safe investment, what happened is that the money leaving our country and other countries essentially financed our debt. So Japan would buy U.S. dollars and keep those in its central bank, and China was buying U.S. dollars. They were essentially loaning us the money and then and buying treasury bonds. And it preserved us from having runaway inflation, which we would have had years ago, with the illusion that the dollar actually continued to have value, the same value, because so many people wanted it. But now those countries are done. China's starting to sell off its dollars. We are quickly losing our status as a global reserve currency. That's not going to happen overnight. It's going to happen over a long period of time. But we're now going to have to start to pay the piper. And inflation is already, President Biden says essentially that it doesn't exist. But, I spend a lot of time talking to Americans, and it's the biggest thing on their mind. And they're watching, the $4 milk, the $4 bread, the $6 gasoline, and most of all, they're watching that houses are no longer affordable. The housing costs have gone, I think, from $223,000 average 2 years ago to about $415,000 today, and inflation and the interest rates have gone from 3 to up to 7%, and that means that a house is 4 or 5 times the price of what it was 2 years ago. And 2 years ago, people were having trouble affording them. And that's part of the problem. Inflation's part of the reason for that. But inflation demoralizes an entire society. It crushes the soul because you can't make money. You get a raise and it's just an illusion, and you realize that 3 months later, that raise just disappeared. And people can never, people are struggling. They're pedaling as hard as they can, and they're going backwards. And when that happens, people stop believing in themselves. They stop believing in their government. They stop believing in their community. They get angry and they get violent.
And worst of all, they don't know why. They aren't going to be able to track it to exactly what's happening. Okay, so one of the things I'm trying to do as I listen to you talk is map out the base assumptions that drive your world. So it's an idea that I came to. My business partner and I would occasionally get in arguments, and I would think, man, he's a moron. And he would think, man, he's a moron. And I thought, hold on, we're both smart, well-intentioned people. So what is it that causes us to think the other person is just out of their mind? And what I realized was we just had different base assumptions about how the world worked. So I watched an interview with you and Dave Smith. It was the clearest example of two smart, well-intentioned people that have different base assumptions, and so they end up yelling at each other. In a respectful way, you guys navigated it well.
I think we did pretty well on that issue,
well.
Right?
But it was very heated because you guys aren't talking about the just base assumption of what's at the core of this. So what I want people to be able to hear in all the things that we just laid out are the base assumptions that are driving your thinking. So one base assumption I hear is that we have to get a new middle class going. So we're going to do whatever it takes there. To overcome the inflation, we have to innovate. So because I should have said debt. To overcome the debt, which if we just keep printing to overcome the debt, we get inflation. So to deal with that, we have to innovate. To innovate, we have to start relaxing some of didn't say relax regulations. I'll say that, but you did say we have to be thoughtful as we regulate these new technologies like AI and blockchain. So
I think there's a war on blockchain right now.
I agree.
And that it's not just deregulating, it's a complete 180-degree pivot. We need to embrace blockchain. We need to make it transactional. We need to force the banks to take it. We need to encourage people, Americans, to use it and to understand that it's their hedge against inflation. It's their ticket to a future. And so I would say not only to deregulate, but, completely pivot and instead of, hostility toward it, we need to be encouraging.
So that's interesting. So so I have a base assumption that spills into a moral value, which is I believe that people ought to have the right to an inflation-resistant store of wealth. Maybe currency is better as a word, but I'll just stick with store of wealth for now. So as you have already eloquently covered, the US dollar is not that, because the US dollar, literally fiat means by decree. So by decree, we can just make as much of that as we want. And again, as you've already said, as we print more, what you're holding becomes worth less. Whereas take gold or take Bitcoin, gold does technically inflate at about 2% a year. So I'll use Bitcoin. Yes, I'm a fan of Bitcoin, but I don't say it for that reason. I say it because it just has an absolutely limited supply. There's no way to make more. So you have a completely finite supply in Bitcoin, which means if you can save in Bitcoin without the government being absurd, which they are currently being absurd. And man, right now, do I hope I'm speaking to the future president so I can really lobby hard here. But that if we have, I believe we ought to have the right to be able to save in that or another store of wealth that cannot be inflated, and that right shall not be infringed, because the deranging effect of somebody being able to reach into my bank account and literally dial down how much it's worth is insane. Like, that's a level of offensive that it breaks my relationship to the government.
Fiat currency is immoral. It's theft, and it is tyrannical. It's anti-democratic. It is oligarchical. It's warmongering. It has you can make the case that it is evil.
So how do you deal with it? Because you're going to come into a regulatory environment that's going to fight you.
Yeah, I think we need to have off ramps, which I think Bitcoin particularly, I think, is an important off ramp, so that Americans can get access to currency that is not going to devalue with inflation. I think everybody, like you said, has that right. And then I think we need to encourage it, make it more transactional. I've heard a million ideas that are exciting about how to do this. I want to have 100 people looking at those ideas and say, here's the pitfalls. One of those ideas is to issue a new a class of treasury notes that, not all of them, but a class that is maybe 1% base currency, and maybe you increase that every year. So the next year it's 2%, the next year it's 3%. My uncle tried to do this when he was president, because he saw the evils of fiat currency, the perils, the dangers of it. And just before he died, he issued silver certificates and gold certificates, and this was a new, class of dollar that was redeemable in gold or silver, so that Americans would have that choice to be able to transact in a base currency, to be able to save a base currency that could not be, as you say so eloquently, that no government official could reach into their bank account and dial back the value of their currency. A very good way to put it. That's exactly what's happening.
Now, would you, as president, be comfortable with people using Bitcoin to pay their taxes?
Yeah, I would encourage that. It has to be. It's very complex because at some point during their lifespan, cryptocurrencies act as commodities, and other parts they act as securities, and so there's no fixed system now that can adequately regulate them. They have to, and also then there's a problem with, for example, Bitcoin. I think we should be able to. People should be able to transact in Bitcoin without paying a capital gains tax, if it increases in value.
Yes, please.
There's a problem there's a technical problem, and because right now so much of Bitcoin is owned by, big investment houses like BlackRock or billionaires, and that would be a huge windfall for those entities, and that itself would be somewhat undemocratic. So maybe there's a way to do it where you say, in smaller transactions, that it's not taxable, but keep the tax on the capital gains tax on the larger accretions of Bitcoin. I'm not sure exactly how to do it, but I think we have to figure out something like that, so that just from a political palatability, you can't pass a law that is going to be a $1 trillion gift to to billionaires. So, we have to figure out a way around that. But I think there are ways to do it.
And are you comfortable with if people really did switch over massive amounts of their net worth, you're never going to get everybody, but a massive number of people switching their entire net worth over to something that the government doesn't control?
Yeah, and I think in some ways it's the only way to save the dollar. If we have, we integrate Bitcoin into it. So I think we need, you don't want the dollar to collapse overnight, but I think the dollar is going to collapse. And I think the pathway out for the dollar and also for individuals, for the working poor in this country, the middle class, is to be able to create some wealth for themselves with Bitcoin. I mean, and there's all kinds of, David or Bill Ackman has this scheme for giving every child born in this country $10,000 or the equivalent around it's $20,000 at birth. If they graduate from high school, they get that money, and then they can spend it over time. And maybe you do something like that with that you integrate crypto or Bitcoin or some kind
then
of
talk to me about education, because if you do that, it will be pointless. People will piss that money away unless we actually start teaching people things that I think that we should be teaching them in high school. Like, you graduating from today's high school is not going to prepare you to do anything intelligent with that money.
Yeah.
If, on the other hand, you actually teach them what money is, that it's your stored energy over time, right? That this is a thing that can be invested, getting them to understand investing principles. I
think,
so
listen,
important.
I'm not endorsing Ackman's proposal. It's an interesting proposal because it does exactly that. What it does is it puts that money in the hands of people when they're young, but they can't actually cash in till much later in life. And I think there may be, guardrails about.
I think at one point his plan was like it was your retirement plan.
Yeah.
And so you couldn't touch it.
And maybe the retirement plan, but what it puts you in charge of making decisions to grow that money,
which I love. I just
right?
want people to actually be educated.
It incentivizes people to actually, develop their financial intelligence and understand where you invested, and it gets people talking about it, and it gets them. And I think that's good for our country, because our country, was based upon this model that everybody here, unlike any other country in the world, everybody was an entrepreneur, everybody was a capitalist. And the more that we encourage that, they have a system like this in Australia that the people who are proposing this, like Ackman, are using as a model that's worked very, very well there. These are all ideas that I think are exciting. I don't know enough about them. I haven't heard the criticism on the other side, so I need to do a lot of that. But I want to do those kind of innovations.
The innovations with you are one of the things that really excites me. So one, just going to throw it out there for you to ignore, but man, would it be cool if you invited the public in via camera just to hear some of these arguments and some of these debates. Would be extraordinary for us to all go along with you and get that education. But okay, so the fact that you want to do blockchain, I find utterly fascinating. Talk to me about how blockchain could help with transparency of budgets. I thought this was genius.
Well, I think, I don't know whether we put the whole budget on blockchain. That's where I would love to have a budget. My objective is to have a budget that's completely transparent. And I think we can use a combination of blockchain and AI to do that, to make it so that it's easy to comprehend.
So you'd use AI to do like a pre-digestion?
Well, I'll give you an example. The Pentagon budget just came out a couple of days ago, and it failed its audit for the 20th time in 20 years, right? So it cannot be audited. This is what they've concluded. It cannot be audited. Mm-hmm. They lost $4 trillion. And that is material that they don't know if they have it or they don't. And there's all these instances of them buying things because that they think they have an inventory, but they can't locate it. So they buy the same product,
Crazy.
the same thing over and over, and nobody knows where anything is. So you would use AI crawlers to go through, their supply depots and identify everything and figure out where everything goes. I mean, this would, right? And then, and it makes you more efficient. And then to put everything up on blockchain or in some form where every American can read every item that's spent. And if somebody spends $16,000 on a toilet seat, we know right away. And if people are doing monkey business, clearly there's, what's happening in Ukraine right now, there's no auditing. You send $50 billion over to the most corrupt country in the world. And again, every year it wins that prize, the most corrupt country in the world. And we're sending, another $60 billion over there, and with no idea how they're spending it. So, we're just burning money. And I think we can identify the inefficiencies. We can identify the stuff that we should not be. I'll give you an example of the GAO which is the General Accounting Office, and the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, do these reports on waste every year. And they identify like the most egregious programs in government. The stuff, like Anthony Fauci was studying, how fast you can kill a beagle with, with some kind of a parasite, by, putting it's really terrible stuff that the government shouldn't be doing, right? And that everybody would be outraged if they knew the government money was being spent on it. So the GAO does a study every year, and that study identifies the most wasteful programs in government. And the studies are about this thick. And then that study is put on a shelf and nobody ever looks at it again. So what I would do is take all of those studies and get AI to identify, the stuff that we don't need, and put it up on blockchain so every American can look at it and understand, the etiology of it. And then I'll take the worst of those programs, put them all in a single bill, and then send that bill to Congress with an up or down vote, right? So you're taking the 400 worst programs in government and you're giving them to Congress and say, you vote on the whole thing. We get rid of every single one of these things. That's what we did with the Base Closure Commission, and it worked. It was the only way they could close all the bases. Because each base is goring somebody's ox every time there's somebody out there who wants that base. And they needed to put them all in one bill and have an up or down vote. And that's the only way to win it. But we can do that with wasteful programs. And I think using AI and blockchain to identify the crazy stuff,
helps you get there.
Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of people think that it is impossible for you to win this election, that you are a spoiler. What are your best kill shots for Trump and Biden?
You mean, how do I win?
Yeah, at a policy level, what do you have to convince the American people of to open their eyes and see that we're done. There it is. Vote for me.
Well, what I need to convince people of is that I can win. Because if I can win, if they think I can win, that I will win. Because all of the polls show that they want to vote for me. But they're not voting for me out of fear, because they think if they vote for me, Biden's going to get elected and the Republic's going to be over, or Trump's going to get elected. But if in terms of favorability, I beat both of them in every poll. In terms of the people the number of Americans who want to vote for me, and
so if they all like you so much, What is it that they don't believe? That you can't get enough other people?
They don't believe that I can get enough votes to win. So
Based on what polls? So they're seeing a poll that says...
Well, no, I mean, if you look at a regular poll that's a three-way race between me, Biden, and Trump, I'm going to get around 15 or 16%. You know, the high one's 27%, the low one's 10%. And, you know, one thing that I only need to get to 34% to win. It's a three-way race. But, you know, people think, oh, he can't get there, so therefore voting for him is throwing away my vote. So I have to vote for Trump or Biden to keep the other guy in. And they're voting out of fear, whereas I need them to vote out of hope. Now, here's kind of the good news is that in a head-to-head race, and this is every poll that's been done on this issue, but the biggest poll is the Zogby poll, which is the most accurate poll that's been done this entire race because it's 26,000 people. It's 10 times the typical poll. Usual polls by Quinnipiac, Gallup, Harvard-Harris, New York Times, Siena are usually about 1,000 to 2,200 people. Zogby did a poll, 50 states, 26,000, so more than 10 times the typical poll, and it has a margin of error of almost zero. And what they asked a question that is rarely asked, in a head-to-head race, me against Biden, who wins? Well, I win in a landslide. I win 39 states, he wins 11.
Whoa.
In a head-to-head race, me against Trump, who wins? I win, but much narrower, only by about 3 or 4 electoral votes, but I still win. Biden can't win no matter whether I'm in the race or not. If I stay in the race, Biden loses. If I get out of the race, he loses worse. He loses 2 extra states, Maine and Virginia. So, you know, Biden is the spoiler, because the definition of the spoiler is somebody who cannot win and is disrupting the expectations of somebody who can. Well, I can win, he can't. So I'm not a spoiler, he's the spoiler.
Well, so it's interesting. From the time that you came on my radar until now, my sense of the playing field has changed pretty dramatically. So talk to me about, there's 2 wild cards on the table as far as I'm concerned. What happens with Trump's conviction? Do swing voters say, no, I can't do it? Or does that actually help him? And then Biden is, from a cognitive decline standpoint, is just getting memed so hard. There's no universe in which that isn't having an impact. And of course, everybody's starting to prognosticate that they're going to pull a switcheroo and swap him out with somebody.
Yeah.
If you can comment on those 2 things, I'd love to hear it.
My feeling, and I had this feeling prior to Trump's conviction, that if he gets convicted, it's going to help him. And, you know, he was behind DeSantis very early on. And as soon as they filed the lawsuits against him, he was 15 points behind DeSantis. As soon as they filed the lawsuits, he pulled ahead. The Democrats are stupid. The DNC is a very stupid group of people, and they make very, very big strategic blunders. And one of their strategic blunders was to bet all of their chips on President Biden and not just have a primary where they chose the best candidate to beat Donald Trump. You know, instead they chose a candidate who has all of these very, very clear cognitive deficits. And, you know, Americans, you look at President Biden, I worry. You know, every time I see him on TV, I think all of us, you know, it's like watching your 5-year-old play on a jungle gym for the first time. You're like, oh my God, I hope, you know, he doesn't fall or something. But the bad part of it is, if you look at this man, and, you know, we're right closer now to nuclear exchange than at any time since 1962. And, you know, the Russians today fired, I think, 2 or 3 missiles off the shore of Cuba. And they're talking about nuclear war, and the Russians have 2,500 more weapons than we do. They have better defensive weapons than we do. The the latest Pentagon report showed that if in a nuclear exchange that we would lose 90 million Americans within the first 24 hours and 90 million over 6 months after a nuclear exchange. So it's just, and you don't have anybody in the White House who seems to be thinking this through. It's like it's Tony Blinken, who was on stage in Kiev the other night playing a guitar at a concert while 500,000 kids are dying, down the street. And he's in a rock concert. In the end, he stands up like the hero and says, "We will never abandon Ukraine." There are no adults in the room. And you say President Biden is the guy who has the football. He has to make the call. They wake him up at 3:00 in the morning. You have 6 minutes to make the call. 6 minutes to decide whether to retaliate, to send the missiles up. And during that 6 minutes, he's being pushed by 6 Secret Service men through a hallway at as fast as he can go, through one of the tunnels below the White House, which I've been in. And they're pushing him to the bunker. So, he has to make a call that's going to affect all of our children, all of humanity. And, don't you want somebody who's on the ball and who's thinking this through and who's, just not cognitively impaired to do that?
Do you think he's such a liability to the DNC that they'll replace him?
I don't know. I don't make those kind of predictions because I have no idea what they're doing now seems irrational and crazy to me. Every step they've made, it seems crazy to me.
Well, I know you hate making these kind of predictions. I'll make one attempt to get you on my team here. So we started with a quote from your very famous uncle, who was trying to explain the importance of being able to think from your opponent's standpoint.
Yeah.
And so, look, when you predict the future, you're going to be wrong. When you live by the crystal ball, you end up eating glass. Like, I totally understand that. You end up eating glass.
Yeah, okay. I like
so, it. Yeah. So that I understand. But and I'll go first so that if we end up looking ridiculous, fair enough. I think Biden has and I'm obviously of a certain generation, I get my information in a certain way. So I just see the memes. The meme energy has shifted. And seeing the mainstream media shift, one of two paths is before us. Either they are so cynical that they want him to get reelected, and they want him to get reelected so that he's just a face and that whoever they are controlling everything. Or they're like, ooh, we're now losing the meme battle. Even the people that were with us before are now mocking us. We're going to have to swap out. And that has been going around enough that as long as they swap him out with somebody that is an already known entity, I think then they would have a shot. They'd have a better shot for sure from where I'm sitting. Because I can't, like, the one thing I'll just say, I cannot vote for somebody that has that level of cognitive decline.
Were you going to vote for him if he didn't have that level of cognitive decline?
I would then investigate his policies. Because he has cognitive decline, I ruled him out.
Okay.
So I would have been open to it, yes. So I was, my big hot button thing, there's two. The thing that comes the closest to my single issue voter is the debt and how we treat that. But both Trump and Biden are reckless with printing money.
Yeah,
reckless.
They both, Trump in 4 years, he came in and said he was going to balance the budget. And then in 4 years, he ran up $8 trillion. He spent $8 trillion, which is more than every president from George Washington to George W. Bush, 283 years of history. President Biden is now going to beat him if he stays on track. He's running up $1 trillion every 90 days, adding $1 trillion, and neither of them are going to deal with it. It's so selfish and it's so short-sighted and so insane. And yet, President Biden just, he's printing money and, trying to use it to get, to buy the election, essentially, giving these new programs that are wonderful to, forgive all student debt, I think the student debt's a crisis. I have a plan for dealing with it, but just forgiving it all is just a way of adding the debt that is going to land on those kids. In our country, it's not patriotism. It's something else.
I'm also terrified by his border policy. How would you approach that?
I would shut the border. I would close it down immediately. And I've been down there and met with all the law enforcement people, the Border Patrol, local law enforcement, and I know exactly what I'm going to do.
How much can you tell us?
Well, there's obvious things you can do. There's infrastructure things, there's personnel, there's policy. The infrastructure is you need to complete there's 27 gaps in the wall. You don't need a wall all the way from Brownsville, Texas, 2,200 miles to San Diego. You do need a wall in the urban areas where immigrants can disappear immediately. So there's 27 holes in that wall, and we need to patch them all. And then there's also a lot of other infrastructure that the Biden administration took down, the long-distance cameras, the night lights, the sensors.
Why do you think he took those down?
I think, and this is the most innocuous interpretation of why he took it down, because there's a lot of sinister and nefarious interpretations, but I think it was political pettiness. I think he just, he campaigns against Trump's wall, and so he wanted a complete 180. That's what I think, but I don't know. And even that, the tragedy that's happening at that border every day is so monumental and momentous. They've let probably 9 million people across, and it's not humanitarian for them. It's a humanitarian crisis, and it's a humanitarian crisis for everybody, but particularly for working poor in our country who are getting destroyed by it. The social safety net is getting crushed. In New York City, on Randall's Island, the playing field, the kids weren't allowed to play during COVID, and there was a lot of scholarship trajectory kids in high school who lost their lives. And their expectations about life and about being able to play college sports. And now they can't play sports because there's encampments for these migrants on the playing fields. That's what they're using them for. So it's just, it's mind-blowing. And every fact you add to it, I watched 300 people come across between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. in Yuma. And the 9 Border Patrol men have committed suicide in the last year, because they're so demoralized because they're not allowed to do their jobs. Instead of barring people from entry, they're processing them. They fingerprint them. If they don't have a criminal record, they bring them to the Yuma airport. They put them on a plane to any destination that they want. And if they don't have the money, because the cartels have stolen their money, then the Border Patrol buys them a ticket and gets reimbursed from FEMA. And we're paying for this. We're paying tens of thousands of dollars for every migrant that comes across. We're paying people to invade our country, and then they go to New York or whatever city, and they're taken advantage of by predatory employers. They have asylum dates 7 years in the future. Maybe they'll show up, maybe they won't, but it's 7 years. So and you have predatory employers who are paying them $6 or $10 an hour, and they're competing. That employer is competing against union shops for jobs. So that means the union workers who could actually be part of the middle class are not getting the work. And it's infuriating what they've done. It's infuriating. And I could give you a lot more details, but it makes me steam when I think about it. What they need to do is fix that infrastructure, including the fences that were taken down and the access roads. You need to begin enforcing the Migrant Protection Act, which is the act that requires immigrants from other countries who come to Mexico, try to come through in Mexico with an asylum claim, that they remain in Mexico till their asylum claim is adjudicated. And that was the law that, the Biden administration changed. And then the catch and release policy should be changed to catch and return. And then you need personnel changes. Finally, we need 300 asylum court judges on the border adjudicating a case right there immediately. And we need about 3,000 more Border Patrol, because there's been a big attrition because they're so demoralized. So, I'll do that on all that stuff. Beginning on day one, I'm going to do something else, which I don't think any Republican or Democrat can do. I'm going to order the State Department and the Post Office to begin issuing passport cards to any American who can't afford one for free. A passport card is a federally, issued government photo ID. It doesn't have your medical records. It's got nothing else, just a photo ID like a driver's license. This is absolutely critical. And the reason is there are tens of millions of Americans who don't have driver's licenses, so they have no government-issued photo ID. And they're mainly Democrats. They're elderly people who've lost their license, who no longer drive. They're students who don't yet have a license and tend to vote Democratic, and they're minorities in cities who don't need a license. If you don't have a driver's license, and so the Democrats, and this is why the Democrats don't want a requirement of photo ID at the voting booth. Because if you require that, there's a lot of Democrats who don't have that ID, and they're not going to get it. They're not going to go pay $60 and wait in DMV at the nightmare, of DMV for the whole day just to vote. They're not going to do it. And if you don't have a government-issued photo ID, you are a second-class citizen. You can't open a bank account. You can't visit your kids at school. You can't check into a hotel. You can't take an airplane, and a lot of other stuff. So I'm going to make sure everybody has a photo ID. And what will this do? Number one, our team has met with the most important civil rights leaders, people like Andrew Young and Reverend Al Sharpton, and they've said, if I do this, that they will withdraw their objection to the requirement to show ID at the voting booth. So that diffuses the tension in one of the most, volatile debates between Republicans and Democrats. Number two, people now are going to have a better life because they have an ID. And number three, there's laws in this country that make it criminal offense for an employer to hire an undocumented alien. There's a loophole, though. The employer only has to check a box that says, I saw their Social Security card. Social Security cards don't have a photo on them. They're easily fabricated. And on some work sites in New York, they're passed hand to hand. And the employer says, I saw it, checks the box, and then he pays them in cash.
Right.
Oh, he's escaped liability. What I'm going to say is you cannot hire somebody in this country. It's a criminal offense, and you're going to go to jail if you hire somebody without seeing their government-issued photo ID. And that will shut down most of the border, 90% of it overnight.
By killing the incentive.
Because nobody's coming here if they know you cannot get a job in the United States if you don't have a government-issued photo ID, and there's no way to get that.
Yeah, so if I had to make a bet as to what's going on, it could be a little bit of political pettiness on the Biden administration's part, but I have a feeling this is more about pathological compassion. So what do you say to the people that are going to be horrified that, these people are seeking a better life, and that's what America is about, and that's what's written on the Statue of Liberty, and why are you effectively caging them up in South, technically North and South America, but why do that?
First of all, first of all, no nation can survive if it doesn't close its borders. If we need an orderly immigration policy that is compassionate, that leads with compassion, and we do that in this country. People who have asylum claims automatically get in if they can show that they have an authentic asylum claim. So we lead with compassion. You need to be able to control the border. Right now, the border is being controlled by the Sinaloa drug cartel. And that cartel is advertised. The first night I went there, I watched 300 people come across. The first 110, they were coming up in buses. There were 55 people in a bus, these brand new buses that were owned by the Sinaloa cartel. They'd pull up, 55 people get off each bus, and they're all night long, they're coming in. The first two buses were exclusively young men from West Africa of military age. And I didn't actually get to talk to them because they were being processed when I got there, but I saw them all. And then the second two buses were mainly people from Asia. They were from Kazakhstan, Tajikistan. I talked to every one of them. Azerbaijan, Nepal, Tibet, Bangladesh, mainly from China. The whole night there were only two immigrants who came all over with asylum claims. And one was from Colombia, one was Peru. They're only Latin Americans. The other ones were coming across because they were answering advertisements on TikTok and YouTube that the cartels are doing all over the world, saying, we can get you into America for $10,000. And
What's the agenda? Why do they want to do that?
because they're making $10,000 a body.
That's it. Just we'll get you
They're
across.
making billions of dollars. Billions.
Good Lord.
And so they come and they tell them exactly how to do it. Everybody who came across knew exactly what was going to happen to them. There was no fear. There was no surprise. They knew exactly every step of the way. And by the way, they had been, I talked to them, and a large part of them have been robbed. The Peruvian family, their entire life savings have been stolen from the cartels. I spent a day at a rape center there that specializes in children who've been raped immediately before they come across the border. There's, 80,000 kids have disappeared. There's a rape tree.
Whoa. 80,000 kids have disappeared?
Something like that. Now, it may be 40,000, because I'm not remembering this number, but it's between 40 and 80,000 people kids who have disappeared. People can Google this and check on me. I'm not going to swear on that number, but it's a huge number. Right. There's a rape tree, they call the rape tree, on the other side of the border that you can see from my vantage, where I was. And it's where the cartels extract the final payment. So women, children get raped there, and the Border Patrol sees it all the time. They can't do anything about it because it's on the Mexican side. And then I spent a day at a rape center that just treats children who have been raped. And it's in Yuma. The people of Yuma are the most incredible Americans that they are taking this onslaught, and they're handling it with total compassion. The head of the hospital told me that his wife was coming in for to end the pregnancy, to have the baby, right, to induce pregnancy, and that I think there are 13 or 23 beds, I forget it was, in the maternity ward, and every one of them was occupied by migrants, and that they did not have room anywhere in it, in that hospital, for the local women who had induced for induced births, et cetera. So they have to turn their own people away to treat these migrants, and they're doing it. And he said last year, this is a small regional hospital. He said last year they spent, I think it was $9 million. It may have been 20. I'm bad on the numbers right now, but on the unreimbursed expenses to pay for the migrants. What's crushing this town? The border towns are just getting crushed. And now every town in our country is a border town. This is happening all over our country, and it's terrible. It's not humanitarian. The people who are coming across are being terribly mistreated. And then, they can't legally work here. So for 7 years, what are they going to do? It's not a good solution. What we need is high high walls at the border and then wide gates so that people who come through the legal process can come in, that they have a faster path to citizenship, that, there's 10 million jobs in small businesses that are looking for people coming from abroad. And we need those workers here if we're going to keep Social Security solvent for a couple more years, if we're going to have taxes paid, et cetera. We need to enrich, our population with people who come in legally. But, coming across the border, and letting the drug cartels run U.S. border policy is not a good solution. Nobody thinks that's a good idea.
All right. You are running on the idea of uniting the country against two people who do not seem to share that aim, certainly not in their rhetoric. You've got the thing that freaks me out the most. I never said what my second thing was. That's my big issue, which is authoritarian rule. And seeing all the lawfare against Trump, love him or hate him, I just think this is absolutely not what I think of when I think of American values. So if you were elected, would you pardon Trump for the convictions? Would you pardon Hunter Biden if he gets convicted?
I would. First of all, I wouldn't. I wouldn't make that decision now. I agree with you that I think that the Democratic, and I don't. In terms of Hunter Biden, I haven't seen any evidence that was politically motivated prosecution. I think it was a Democratic prosecutor. So I don't know, what the justification for pardoning him is. If there was a determination that Trump's prosecution was political, Personally, I think Trump's prosecution will probably get overturned in the higher courts because of a couple. I just saw the jury instructions from the judge, and they seemed to me that that they were not they weren't constitutional. But I don't know. I don't know. I didn't watch the case carefully. I just read a couple of those jury instructions, and they didn't seem right. But I wouldn't say, at this point, whether I was going to pardon anybody right now, except for people I know I'm going to pardon, which is Julian Assange and Edward Snowden and, probably Ross Ulbricht, too. People who are clearly politically prosecuted and people who are whistleblowers and should be, with Snowden and Assange, we should be building monuments to them, not putting them in prison.
Why is that?
What?
Why is that?
Well, Snowden told us for the first time, the reason they don't like him is he told us that NSA was listening to every one of our phone calls and storing all the information, and that every text message that we write, every email that you write is being taken by NSA and stored in a data center for retrieval sometime in the future. So it's completely unconstitutional. It's against all of our values. It's against statutes that say that the intelligence agency cannot spy on the American people. They were violating it. Edward Snowden told that to the world, to us, to American people, his fellow countrymen. And Congress then convened and passed laws to regulate it. So clearly what he did was a service to our country. It's something we would want people in the military to do, to tell us that, that these bureaucracies have turned against us and are now spying on us. And then Assange just did what every newspaper editor in the country, he's an editor of a paper, and he got information, inside information, including, mercenary groups that had murdered civilians in Iraq, and he revealed that we weren't being told about, U.S. paid contractors murdering people, and that the Pentagon was keeping it quiet. And he got a hold of that information and published it. He didn't break the law. He did what every newspaper editor in the country is supposed to be doing. And it's weird to me that all the editors in the country, from the Washington Post, the New York Times, and everybody else, is not, sitting in front of the White House demanding that he be released, because they're in jeopardy. So those people, that they stand up for freedom of speech. They stood up for our Constitution. They knew they were going to make sacrifices. They've suffered terribly from that. They made the same sacrifice to give us our rights that the Patriots made in the American Revolution. They put their houses at, their livelihoods, their freedom at risk, their salaries, their wealth. They put it all at risk, and their lives, in order to give us these freedoms. And Assange and Snowden did the same thing. So we should be honoring them. We should not be punishing them.
What do you think has happened to the sense of what American values are that lead people to now so quickly abandon the Constitution, whether it's during COVID, whether it's crushing down the First Amendment, which has been rampant? You obviously have been censored to death. People that just have you on their podcast will get censored. It's crazy. But that seems to be it seems to be coming forth from something in the people far more than the government. I think the government echoes the people.
Yeah, I think a couple of things happen. One is something very basic, and I actually spoke about this last night. I was at the Nixon Library, and the Nixon Library is launching a big program on resuming civics classes in our country, which, to me, you're much younger than I was, but when kids were growing up in the 50s and 60s and even 70s in this country, every child in our country had to take at least 3 civics classes. So, and that taught us our rights, taught us to stand up for them, and taught us that, that people died to give us those rights, and we had to be willing to die to preserve them. And we all learned that. And they stopped teaching civics in the late 70s, early 80s. I think you have a generation. We were taught that, it's our job to fight, that somebody may try to take these rights away from us, and that we had to fight them, we had to battle them, we had to fight them to the gates of hell, and then we had to fight them till hell freezes over, and then we had to fight them on the ice, and never stop fighting to keep them. And that's how I was raised, right? And so, but we have a couple generations of kids that didn't get those lessons when they were young. And then we have the press, which has been utterly compromised. And it's been compromised for a couple of reasons. One is the revival of Operation Mockingbird, which is now very, very well documented. There's a couple of CIA historians, Dick Russell and David Talbot, but a couple of others who've done exposés recently on, how much of the press is now controlled by the CIA and the NSA and the intelligence establishment, and, common journals like Daily Beast, Rolling Stone, which used to be a counterculture journal and is now, the editor-in-chief there, Noah Schlackman, is right out of the intelligence community. And if you look, they're all, pro-Ukraine, pro-vaccine, all the things that the intelligence community, pro-U.S. expansion abroad, all of the, you can kind of look and see where they stand on the issue. So on Slate, Daily Kos, National Geographic, the Scientific American, all of these are now, become kind of apparent bullhorns for the intelligence agencies. You have that, and then and then Washington Post and New York Times, of course. But there's something more going on, which is just this, this merger, this corrupt merger of state and corporate power, which has also subsumed the press. So, what we saw during COVID, where journalism really became degraded, that, the journalism has always played a critical role in democracy. There's the fourth estate. There's 3 branches of government, but the fourth, there's supposed to be the guardian of democracy, is the free press. And the press in Louis Brandeis's words, Justice Louis Brandeis is supposed to maintain a fierce skepticism toward government pronouncements and government authority. That is the role of the president of democracy. And during COVID, we saw the opposite. Instead of speaking truth to power, they became stenographers for government propaganda. They became active propagandists, marginalizing, vilifying, gaslighting dissenters, destroying reputations of anybody who, burning. Heretics could not be interviewed. Yeah. They had to be burned at the stake and made examples of. And you saw these incredibly important scientists being fired, losing their jobs, being ridiculed by the press, and then, of course, any doctor who who departed from the government orthodoxies, their reputation was destroyed, their licenses were yanked. To this day, the mainstream media will not report about vaccine injuries. So you have all of these, children dying on playing fields. And nobody even asked the question, why are children suddenly dying of strokes, 10-year-olds, and myocarditis, and all of these other diseases that we never saw before in children, and then professional athletes dying all over the world, and you never see the question answered. And then, all of the rise of all these autoimmune diseases and turbo cancers and all these other things that the press should be talking about. But the press now sees its job as manipulating the American public. Their job is not to tell you the truth, but to tell you what's good for you, what they think is good for you, right? And it's good for you to believe all of the propaganda about COVID and mask work, that there's a scientific basis for them, that social distancing absolutely works, that the vaccines will prevent transmission, that if you take the vaccine, you'll never get sick. That's what they all were saying. And how many times did you hear Anderson Cooper and Jake Tapper and all these other ones saying we need to shame the people who don't do this. We need to, they're bad people, they're evil people. And, and then the chyrons at the bottom that were just saying death counts every day, to keep everybody in a state of fear and compliance. And instead of imagine if somebody had gotten up and said, wait a minute, let's start asking people questions. And they never did. They still won't today. They're still, glorifying, we had the worst COVID death rate in the world. And in our country, we had 16% of the COVID deaths. We only have 4.2% of the world's population. Oh, why are people getting awards for this? We literally, whatever we did was the worst of anybody. And so why are we giving awards to the people who were masterminding this? Now they're getting called in front of Congress, but the press still won't cover it.
Right.
The Republican press is covering it, conservative press, but the liberal Democratic media will not cover when these people are making stunning admissions. Yeah, we had no science for social distancing. We had none for masks. Fauci getting up there and saying, I never gave any thought to whether children would be harmed by missing school and by wearing masks all the time. Never asked the question. Can a kid learn to speak when he can't see anybody else speak? What's it going to do to his social interactions? Nobody asked these questions. And, the Brown University study showed that young kids during COVID, there was a 22 drop in IQ points. And CDC has now had to rewrite its childhood milestones so that, for the last 40 years, since CDC developed them, a child should be able to walk at 12 months. Now it's 18 months. A child should have I think, 50 words at 18 months, and now it's 2 years. So all the milestones have been pushed back because they did so much damage to our kids, and they're trying to normalize it. and that's their answer to a public health crisis, to make people think it didn't happen. And, diabetes now, when I was a kid, a typical pediatrician would see one case of diabetes in his lifetime. Now, 1 out of every 3 kids who walks through his office door is pre-diabetic or diabetic. And you want to know, diabetes with mitochondrial dysfunction, which is diabetes, I think you know a lot about, is now costing us more than the military budget. And nobody's asking why. Autism in my generation today, right now, 1 in 10,000 men have it. And in my kids' generation, it's 1 in every 34,
Whoa.
1 in every 22 boys. Nobody's saying, why is this happening? We have a public health establishment that this is so much worse than COVID. You look at the cost to our society. COVID was killing people in their last year of life. According to the CDC, the average person who died from COVID had 3.8 chronic disease. They were at death's door. They were in the last final years of their life. The chronic disease is getting people in their first years of life, and then they have 75 years of costs and suffering in front of them. And nobody even asks these questions, and there's no journalist who will ask the obvious question. You tell us it has nothing to do with this exposure, with processed foods, with vaccines, whatever. Then what does it? What's causing it? And isn't it your job to know? You have a $42 billion budget at NIH. How many studies have you done on this? Let's see them. There's no journalists out there that read science. They're scientifically illiterate.
Yeah, that's what I can't track is if you, going back to what we were saying earlier, if you're really trying to get to the truth, then they're a pretty obvious set of questions. I don't expect people to know the truth at first. I expect them to hunt it down. And there's certainly a lot of questions.
Look, we were told that Haiti and Nigeria and these very poor countries, Haiti's the poorest country in the hemisphere, were going to be wiped out by COVID because they couldn't afford the vaccine. So Haiti ended up having a 1.3% vaccination rate. And the death rate from COVID in Haiti was 14 people per million population. The death rate among Black people in America was more than 3,000 per million population. So 200 times what Haiti, and same with Nigeria. Nigeria had a 1.4% vaccination rate and a death rate of 14 people per million population. So what now? There may be good reasons for that.
Right, correlation, causation.
Yeah, you don't know, but it's a younger population, and COVID was affecting the old, so there's a lot of reasons that could explain it. But we should know that,
right?
Right? Somebody should be asking that question and saying, why did they do when they didn't have anything? Why'd they do so much better than we did? And nobody's asking that because nobody really wants to know the answers.
Yeah, there's a whole nother episode we could do just on that. I've got to get you out of here, but I want to ask one final question, which is your family has paid an inordinate price for what I'll round to American values. Your uncle obviously was killed. Your father was killed when you were, 12?
I was 14 when my dad was
even
killed.
Worse. Was that price worth it to move this country forward?
Yeah, I feel like both my father and all my uncles joined the military during World War II to go. I lost an uncle. I lost 2 of my uncles in World War II, who made a calculation to stand up for their country. We have soldiers, our military, everybody who you see in uniform has made the decision that our country is worth dying for. So, whether you're in uniform or not, we all should believe that. We all should believe. And, when I was during the first year of the pandemic in August, I went to speak at a big rally, huge rally, 1.3 million people in Berlin. It was people from all over Europe. It was like Woodstock. There were people from every color of the rainbow. rainbow, and it was a joyful crowd, and there were people who were saying, they're taking away our rights, and we don't like it. And that was the whole point. And while I was there, I wasn't wearing a mask, and in the big crowd, there was almost nobody wearing a mask, maybe nobody. And I got asked by an NBC film crew who were all masked. They're the only people wearing masks out there. They said, "You're not wearing a mask. Aren't you scared of dying?" And I said, "There's things that are a lot scarier to me than dying." And they said, "Like what?" And I said, "Like losing my constitutional rights, and like living like a slave, and having my kids grow up in America where they don't have the Bill of Rights." And we saw this assault on the Bill of Rights during COVID, like unprecedented. We saw it first. The government got involved in censoring political speech, and it started out with the COVID countermeasures, but then it moved to Ukraine and all these other issues. And I can say this because I have the lawsuit, Biden versus Kennedy, which is now up, the Court of Appeals. But I've won in the Court of Appeals. And then Murthy versus Biden, which was a case that we helped, draft that was brought by the Louisiana and Missouri attorney generals. And we got all the discovery from those cases. We have the Twitter files that show that the White House was was coercing the social media sites to censor political opponents. This never happened in our country before. Once they figured out that they could get away with censoring speech, and they went after everything else. They went after the second plank of the First Amendment is freedom of worship. They closed every church in our country for a year with no scientific citation. They just said close them. There's no notice and comment rulemaking, no hearing, no environmental impact statement, just shut them down. And then they went after freedom of assembly, which is also in the First Amendment. They mandated all these social distancing regulations, which now we know were completely scientifically based. Anthony Fauci said, "I don't know, it just came from somewhere. I don't know where it came from." And then they went after private property, the Fifth Amendment. They shut down 3.3 million businesses with no due process, no just compensation. They closed down jury trials. The Seventh Amendment guarantees the right of a jury trial in any case or controversy exceeding $25. And they gave immunity to any company that was involved in countermeasures, no matter how egregious your injury, no matter how negligent their conduct, no matter how reckless their contract, you can't sue them. And then they abandoned the Fourth Amendment guarantees against warrantless searches and seizures with all this track and trace surveillance where you had to give your medical records to leave your home. So they literally plowed down the entire Bill of Rights. And 1 year, that we'd held for 290 years in our country and gone in 1 year. And, that was shocking to me that nobody complained about it.
That's what scared me.
And that all the liberals who I grew up with, who read George Orwell and read Robert Heinlein and read Aldous Huxley and read Kessler and, all of these other people who were warning us about, the dystopian totalitarian future. And it all begins with controlling speech. And then after that,
Yep.
everything disappears and nobody speaks up. Everybody's silent about it. To this day, you talk to a liberal about free speech and they'll say, yeah, but, it was an emergency. And I don't have any confidence, I don't think most Americans do, that President Trump or President Biden can deal with these new issues, the emerging issues like blockchain and AI. AI and blockchain are new industries. They actually have a tremendous promise to provide us the kind of growth and revenue that can get us out of this deficit crisis. But our solution to AI and blockchain has been to drive them out of the country, to overregulate. We need to regulate them. We need to make sure that AI serves the American public in actually keeping its government honest. We don't want it to become an instrument of government to control and enslave us. Elon Musk famously said that AI is going to steal our jobs and that it's going to kill us. And that very well could be our future. It also could provide tremendous prosperity and tremendous improvements in quality of life for the American people. And we need a president who's thinking about those issues now, who's planning for them, who's not driving blockchain abroad. You know, in the past 2 years, 1,200 new cryptocurrencies have registered in Switzerland. They have a net worth of about $390 billion, collective net worth. Well, they should be starting here. We drove them to Switzerland. We've driven them to Singapore. We're driving them to China, to the rest of the world, and blockchain is the future. We need to keep it here like we kept Silicon Valley here. And I don't think President Trump or President Biden is even thinking about this stuff. As I travel around this country, I'm watching this devastating plague of addiction unfolding in every direction. From big cities to small towns, Americans are dying of drug overdoses in record numbers.
I get lost just for a moment, thinking I'm not where I am.
America lost about 3,000 people on 9/11, and we launched an $8 trillion war on terror in response. We're losing 30 times that number every year to drug overdoses, and we hardly do anything about it. I'm going to change that. As president, a top priority for me will be to turn our nation toward recovery from its drug crisis. What if judges, police, social workers, and peer counselors joined forces to keep drug addicted and mentally ill people out of jail and get them into treatment instead? He brought all the stakeholders into one room, and together they created the Criminal Mental Health Project. They now work as a team to offer addicts who are arrested a deal that they can't refuse. They can either enter the program or they can go to jail. Nearly everyone chooses the program, which means that they have to stay sober, get treatment, learn job skills, and find housing. If they meet all of those requirements, then they're able to clear their criminal records. Addiction is absolutely destroying the country. So, I'm going to anybody who's got a model that seems to be working. So that's, why I wanted to talk to you guys.
Pretty sure almost everyone here can agree that we didn't necessarily come here in the best place in life. We all kind of burned it down to the ground in one form or another, and definitely feel a lot of shame. But just getting my hands in some dirt and getting the blood flowing, it will change even the worst day into feeling like everything's going okay.
I was told that you were in recovery. Would you want to tell a little bit about your journey?
I started doing heroin when I was 15 years old, and I did it without my own permission for 14 years.
I'm not myself.
My dad was killed when I was 14. And there was a lot of chaos in my household after that. But I feel, honestly, that I was born an addict. I think I was medicating various issues that I had. But, to me, the most demoralizing feature of this disease was my incapacity to keep contracts with myself, of telling myself at, earnestly, sincerely, honestly, at 9 o'clock in the morning, I'm never going to do that again. And then at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd be doing it. I tried again and again to stop and just couldn't do it. I've lost family members, one of my brothers and a niece, to drug overdoses, and I understand the suffering that so many American families are enduring. Today, the biggest industry in America's depressed rural areas are prisons. I'm going to bring a new industry to these forgotten corners of America, where addicts can help each other to recover from their addictions. We're going to build hundreds of healing farms where American kids can reconnect to America's soil, where they can learn the discipline of hard work, that rebuild self-esteem, and where they can master new skills as farmers, ranchers, carpenters, furniture makers, bakers, and cooks. electricians, plumbers, HVAC technicians, and other trades. We're going to finance these recovery farms with a federal tax on legalized marijuana. We'll put no time limit on recovery, as everyone's journey is different. There is hope for our nation to heal the scourge of addiction. We just have to make it a national priority, and when I'm in the White House, we will.
Was it something in the wind? Was it meant to be pulled apart? I could sit and cry about reasons why I'm in this mess, but what good is that? What a waste of breath. It's a fine line thinking about the words unsaid and setting me free from my chest.
Good afternoon. The format of Mr. Kennedy's presentation today will be a short series of questions in which we've solicited some of our expert members in various subject matters to solicit questions, to compile questions, which I will ask Mr. Kennedy, and of course he will, I'm sure, give us some good answers. The first, obviously, and probably the most all-consuming issue for sheriffs, Mr. Kennedy, has been the border crisis and immigration. We appreciate the fact that you've traveled to the border multiple times to see the crisis firsthand. Our first question comes from Border Sheriff Benny Martinez of Brooks County, Texas. And it is, with the past two presidents running, what would you do differently and the same than these prior administrations when it comes to the border crisis as well as immigration? And what policies would you keep in place?
Thank you for Sheriff Champagne, and I just want to say how grateful I am to be here today. I grew up in a rural area, and I've lived in rural areas in South Dakota and Alabama and other states, but I grew up in a rural county in Virginia, and the sheriff was an iconic, almost heroic figure in all of those counties. I just learned, actually, that a friend of mine who was the sheriff of Lowndes County, where I lived for almost a year, just died in the line of duty. I learned that from Sheriff Champagne. I knew him very, very well. So I want to thank all of you for your service. You are the visible presence of government to most of the people in large parts of America, and so many people look up to you as role models and as foundation stones for the community. So I want to thank you for your service to our country and to Americans. The border, I've been to the border on several occasions, different parts of the border. The first time I went down to Yuma, Arizona, I saw something that really astonished me. I arrived at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I watched 300 people come through a gap in the wall between 2 and 4 a.m. They were being transported in giant white buses that were owned by the Sinaloa drug cartel. And they were coming, there were 55 people in each bus. The first 2 buses that came across were 110 young men from West Africa, all military age. And I didn't get a chance to talk to them because when I got there, they were already in the process of being processed by the Border Patrol. The second 2 buses that came across were mainly people from Asia. The entire evening, I only saw 2 people from Latin America, 1 family from Colombia, and 1 from Peru. And they were the only ones with the asylum claims. Everybody else, I interviewed them all, said we're here to get jobs. They came across with total confidence, knowing exactly what was going to happen to them with their cell phones. They had purchased, I guess you'd call it tickets, but they were responding to ads that the Mexican drug cartels are running on YouTube and on TikTok all over the world. They were coming from everywhere saying, for $10,000, we will get you into the United States. And they tell them every step of the way what's going to happen to them. I spent a lot of time with the Border Patrol. Chris Clem, who is the former chief of the Border Patrol, is working with me very closely on my campaign, and I met him on that trip and became very close friends with him. I met with many, many dozens of Border Patrolmen. I met with sheriffs and law enforcement on both sides of the border, and of course local ranchers and the people in Yuma whose lives are being destroyed. The Border Patrol had, I was told, 9 suicides in the previous year because they're not allowed to do their job. Instead of defending our country against this invasion, they're being asked to. The only thing they do is they process people at the border, meaning they look at see if they have a criminal record. If they don't have a criminal record, they transport them. They're like Uber drivers to the Yuma airport, and they're put on airplanes at any destination they want in the United States. If they don't have the money, and many of them don't because they've been robbed by the drug cartel, the Peruvian family had their entire life savings stolen from them right before they came across the border. So if they don't have the money, the Border Patrol pays for their airline ticket and then gets reimbursement from FEMA. It's the craziest thing that I've ever seen. And then, of course, the gap in the fence where they're coming through, there was construction material piled maybe 15 feet high to complete that gap. And that had been purchased during the Trump administration, and the day that the Biden administration came in, they abandoned the project, and all of that material is just sitting there rotting, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of material. And it's, it's criminal what's happening. We've had, even during the Trump administration, it was 1.3 million people who came across, but during the Biden administration, there's 7 million people who walked across, and then there's probably another 2 million gotaways who are the bad guys who are coming in with drugs and, sex trafficking, child trafficking, criminals, terrorists, who knows, they're coming from all over the place. And it's just, it's unsustainable. I spent a couple of days in Yuma just talking to people about the impact on the local community. And I visited a hospital, the community hospital, a very beautiful hospital in Yuma. They have a maternity ward with 23 beds in it. And the head of the hospital told me that in the previous year, they had to repeatedly turn local women away who are getting birth, inducements, birth, their end of pregnancy. They had to turn them away when they had scheduled to have births because the hospital was filled with undocumented people who were occupying those beds. And the hospital had paid out, I believe it was $9 million the previous year of unreimbursed expenses to take care of illegal migrants. So that was just a hit that the local community has to absorb. They get no help from the federal government. I visited a rape center that specializes in children who've been raped coming across. The whole rape center is designed, multiple beds, multiple rooms for young children. I saw across the border a tree that the Border Patrol calls a rape tree, where the cartels extract the final payment from women and children. And it's just horrific. And, this is what's happening in a border town. The people of Yuma it was heartbreaking to see how kind they were with a good face of our country they're putting forward to take care of all these people who are coming across. And knowing that they're getting no help from the federal government for a problem that the federal government caused them. And they're rising to the occasion. But every city in our country is now a border town. In New York, there's 110,000 illegal migrants. They're crushing the social status. If they're given an asylum date when they come across, it's one of the things the Border Patrol gives an asylum date 7 years in the future. And they're told to show up to the court, that's the only thing you have to do. So they legally can't work. And they're
ending up in our cities on the streets. They're taken advantage of by predatory employers. We're paying, there's construction sites in New York, and this is well documented, that are paying them $6, $10, $12 an hour, and those enterprises are bidding against union shops that would be paying $35 to $50 an hour. So those union shops are not getting the jobs, and everybody gets hurt. On Randall's Island, which is where the playing fields are in New York, these are all the baseball fields, the football fields, soccer fields for the schools. That's where they're putting the encampments now. So the students, we had so many students in New York City who were scholarship track students who were not allowed to play sports during the lockdowns of COVID. And now they can't get on their field. Their whole lives were disrupted. And now they can't get on the fields because there are these encampments on the field. And it's absolutely cataclysmic. It's incomprehensible. It's hard to not think that there's some kind of sinister motive behind it. You know, and the Border Patrol, I had detailed talks about their meetings with Senator Mayorkas, with Secretary Mayorkas, and it gets even more bizarre, you know, after that, and I'm happy to talk to you about any of you about that later. But it's easily solvable. Everybody agrees on that. Everybody agrees we can stop this. There's three major things that we have to do. One is we have to plug those 27 gaps in the wall. You don't need a 20-foot, 5-foot wall all the way from Brownsville, Texas, 2,200 miles to San Diego. But you do need it in the urban areas where migrants can come across and disappear very quickly. In the rural areas, you need fencing and you need access roads. And the fencing had been constructed during the Trump era, but it was literally, a lot of it was dismantled. The long-distance cameras were taken down by the Biden administration as soon as they came into office. The night vision and the lights were taken down. A lot of the sophisticated sensors. You know, Israel has the most sophisticated fence in the world. And until October 7th, nobody was getting through. Until, you know, there was a concerted effort by 3,000 people to get through 2 years of planning. Before that, the sensors and the surveillance system stopped people from getting through with very, very few people on the border. That was one of the problems. They moved all the troops, the IDF troops, up to the north because they had so much faith in that fence. So you can build a fence that works. It doesn't have to be a massive multi-billion-dollar wall. You need a fence, and you need obstacles, and that's been dismantled. So you need those infrastructure. We need personnel. About 2,600 new Border Patrol because there's been so much attrition, and we have to remoralize the Border Patrol and make them, they were demonized and vilified by the papers, by the American public, and they're utterly defeated. These are the most patriotic, hard-working, devoted Americans, and what was done to them over the past 30 years has been heartbreaking. And as I said, there's a depression rate, a suicide rate with them, and we need to put at least 300 asylum court judges there so those cases can be adjudicated immediately with the same day as the people arrive. And finally, we need policy changes. One is, most importantly, we revivify the Migrant Protection Act, which is the act that requires asylum seekers who arrive from other countries into Mexico to remain in Mexico until their case has been adjudicated. And then secondly, the catch and release program that was the Biden administration program needs to be changed into catch and return. If I get elected president, I'm going to seal the border and make it impervious. You cannot have a nation, no nation can survive with an open border. I strongly believe that we should have a humane immigration policy that reflects the compassion of our country and the high values of our country and the fact that we're all immigrants. There has to be legal immigration. We need wide gates. We need to give easier path to citizenship, quicker path to citizenship. There are 10 million businesses in this country that need workers right now, foreign workers. We need foreign workers to come in because our birth rate has dropped. And if we're going to keep Social Security solvent, we do need workers, but we can't be bringing in people illegally. And, my father was very close to Cesar Chavez during his lifetime, and after my dad died in 1968, I worked with Cesar Chavez for almost 2 decades. Mainly, I was working with him on pesticide issues, which disproportionately harm Hispanic farm workers. But he had 2 big issues the last 2 decades of his life, and one is reducing the impact of pesticides on farm workers. The other issue was sealing the border, because he understood that an open border was impacting his capacity to get living wages and decent conditions for his own workers. And so, anybody who's arguing that this is a humanitarian impulse has not been down there and has no clue about what the situation is. This is not there's nothing humanitarian about what's happening there. The immigrants who are being sucked into this process with these promises, $10,000 we're going to get you across, they then get raped, they get robbed, they get exploited, they get extorted, and they get abused by the cartels on their way over, and then they come up here, and there's really no future for them because legally they're not allowed to work. So I think it's the obligation of any president to control the border, to seal it, and have an immigration policy that actually functions to help our country.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next question, again, seems like all we deal with is crises. Comes from one of our board members, RFK Jr., and it regards the mental health and drug crisis, particularly in our jails. It's estimated that 60% of the inmates in our jails are there because of some degree of mental illness, substance abuse. Many have drug problems. What are possible solutions that you have in addressing the mental health crisis in our country?
This is one of the spear tips of my campaign. We have an epidemic now of mental health crisis, depression, suicide. Suicide's now the second largest cause of death among young people. Alcoholism addiction. We lost 107,000 American kids last year to fentanyl. I buried one of my close friends. I just did the eulogy on his funeral on Friday. He was a professional bodybuilder, weightlifter, award-winning, one of the top people in the country, and had extraordinary self-discipline, but nobody is impervious to this disease. And we have an entire generation of kids that's suffering from alienation and dispossession and the atomization that comes from many forces that most of us did not have to cope with when we were growing up. I have 7 kids, and I'm watching them negotiate the social media, the video games, the ease with which you can purchase drugs and all kinds of stuff on the internet, and the altered social norms that are driving us all apart, that are destroying any feeling of community. And that, is something that we need to restore in this country, that sense that we belong in a community, that we belong somewhere, and that our lives are worthwhile. And this is going to get worse and worse as AI begins replacing many of our jobs, and the difficulty that people are going to have when their lives become purposeless. Work does not just give you money; it gives you a sense of self, and it gives you a sense of belonging to your community and a sense of importance. And we're going to watch over the next 4 or 5 years many of our jobs disappear, and what that's going to do to us, I think, is going to really amplify these issues. I think we need people in public office or thinking of that or planning for it. One of the things that I'm going to do, which is kind of going to be my moonshot program, my uncle has a moonshot program with the Peace Corps program, my program is going to be to put healing farms in rural areas all over the country. Right now, we have, marijuana is legal in many states, effectively legal in most states, but it's not federally legal. It's still Schedule I federally, which means the federal government can't tax it, so it's being sold all over the place. But there's all kinds of problems because the people who sell cannabis can't claim tax on it, and they can't bank their money, and that's causing a whole another problem. But we're missing out on a lot of tax revenue. I'm going to deschedule it from Schedule I federally so that we can start collecting taxes on it. That'll give us $8.5 billion in revenue. And I'm going to devote that money to treating addiction, loneliness, mental illness in our country. And the premier program is to create these healing farms in rural areas. Right now, the biggest industry in rural areas in our country is prisons. And I'm going to give those prisons a competition, which is these healing farms where people can go and where they'll grow their own food, organic food, and good high-quality food. And part of the mental illness problem is also associated with processed foods. That's very well documented. And where there's not going to be any screens, there's not going to be any TVs or computer screens or cell phones, and people will basically get reparented, be forced to talk to each other and react to each other. And this will be available for free, paid for by the marijuana tax, and it will be available to people who are on illegal drugs, but also on SSRIs and benzos and Adderall and want to get off of it. The model for this program is a program they have in Italy called San Patrimanos. I had a family member who went there and had a life that's transformed. There's 2,000 kids on that farm. They have a 10,000-acre vineyard. They have dog kennels to teach people that. They teach the trades. They have a bakery. They have a wallpaper factory. They have an apparel factory. They have a furniture factory. And people learn skills, and when they leave, they leave. One of the things that I was talking with the chief about before is that we no longer teach at shop. We no longer teach the trades in high school. When I was a kid, there was shop. Every school that I went to, there was shop classes where you could learn the trades. You could learn carpentry, electrician. Today, they don't teach that anymore. The federal government will pay for you to go to college. Will give you a loan to go to a four-year college, but not to a trade school. And I'm going to change that because the trade schools are what we really need to begin training our kids in. The AI is going to take all of our jobs. But the last job is going to take Elon Musk at first is going to take our job, and it's going to kill us. The jobs we originally thought it was going to go after blue-collar jobs. Drivers, which are going to get hurt. About 40% of the jobs in this country involve driving. But now we've realized that it's actually going after white-collar jobs. It's going after creative jobs. It's going after artists. It's going after accountants. It's going after many kinds of attorneys. My wife is an actress, and she just got off a strike. The main issue in that strike is the use of images by AI to de-employ actors. So all of those jobs are targeted. The one job, the last job that people are going to lose are the trades. If you get a toilet that overflows in the middle of the night, you're still going to need a plumber to climb up your staircase. You're going to need electricians to crawl in your crawl space. You're going to need HVAC engineers. These are the last jobs that are secure. And those are the jobs that will teach people on these healing farms. And when you leave, you'll be reparented. You'll learn to do basic skills like be reliable, show up on time, talk to people, be honest, be responsible, be respectful of authority, and you'll be ready to participate in society and community again. There are already dozens of communities in this country, and I just made a film about them, that are already based upon the San Patrignano model, are doing in Salt Lake City. There's one called The Other Side that is downtown. It has 5 city blocks, and it has 300 convicts and drug addicts who live there, and they now have an employer list of the biggest corporation, the biggest storage unit company in the state of Utah, the biggest trucking company in Utah. They have a second-hand store that's the size of Walmart that they run, and construction firm that they run, and they teach skills to the people who live there. They are self-sufficient, and the people who come out of there come out new human beings, oriented towards community, responsible, and there's a battle for employers all over the state to employ them. So that's one of the things that I'm going to do. Our prisons are filled. I think 50 to 60% of the people in prison are there for drug offenses, for nonviolent drug offenses. And those people should not be subject to punishment. They should be subject to treatment. And people who commit violent crimes should be in jail, and they should be in jail for all the reasons that we want. But we're writing off a lot of human capital in this country by treating drug addicts as criminals. And we ought to give them the opportunity for rehabilitation, and that is going to be one of the spear tips of what I try to do.
Thank you. You touched on the Hamas October 7th attack. Several of our board of directors had the opportunity to travel to Israel and witness firsthand the devastation from those attacks. We're obviously feeling consequences of that in the form of violent protests and security fears, who's coming across the border. We'd like your thoughts on that. If you were president tomorrow, what course of action in consideration of foreign policy dealings with Israel and the war with Hamas and what appears to be a looming war with Hezbollah, what action would you take and what are your thoughts on that?
I'm against wars. Not only I don't think that I think in the last 100 years, probably only one of the wars that we fought was a moral war, which was World War II. The other wars were all wars of choice. And I believe the Ukraine war is a war of choice that I'm going to settle immediately. If the war in Israel is different, it's a defensive war, just like World War II was. We were attacked in World War II. An implacable enemy that was sworn to our destruction, and that is what Hamas is. Hamas is a group that in its charter, it says that its only purpose is the annihilation of Israel. And it actually says in its charter that it's against Islamic law to even negotiate with Israel, except as a ruse. And Hamas, Israel today is in a 5-front war with Iran and Hezbollah, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, Islamic Jihad, and other groups in Syria and Iraq are all at war, are all acting as proxies for Iran, which is pledged to annihilate Israel, to establish an Islamic caliphate and to dominate the Mideast. I'm very pro-Palestinian. My father was killed in part by a Palestinian who was part of the ambush who killed him and who pled guilty to my father's murder. My brother was hijacked by Palestinians in 1973. And his plane was flown into Yemen, and then he was held by people who were demanding the release of the man who pled guilty to my father's murder. And ultimately, the jet, the 747, was blown up in the desert. Ultimately, my brother was released. But I've spent a lot of years advocating for the past 5 or 6 years for Sirhan's release. I've been to visit him in prison for other reasons that we don't need to go into here, because I believe that his continued confinement is unjust. But so I follow justice, and I look at what's happened. I'm pro-Palestinian. The worst thing that's happened to the Palestinians is Hamas. I'll tell you this. The Palestinians, people in the West Bank and Gaza, have gotten more international aid than any group in the history of the world. So after World War II, we built 17 decimated nations in Europe with the Marshall Plan, beginning in 1948. And we rebuilt Europe. The average donation per capita was $626 and $23 per person in those nations. In the past 20 years, we've given Palestinians $8,600 per capita. So 16 times what we gave to rebuild Europe. The Palestinians today are worse off than we found them. There's a 47% unemployment rate. Why is that? It's because Hamas has used that money, number one, to enrich its leadership. The leader of Hamas is Al-Haniyah, has a net worth of $4 billion. The top three officials at Hamas have a collective net worth of $11 billion. So they've just stolen the money. And the money that they didn't steal, they've used to create a war machine. They built 300 miles of tunnels in an entire underground city where there's arms depositories, armories, command centers, and smuggling operations to bring weapons in. They have destroyed the water system. Gaza should be one of the most affluent places in the Mideast. It has miles of white sand beaches. It has a port on the creek just north of the Suez Canal, at the confluence of all these trade routes. When Israel left in 2005, it said, we will rebuild that port and make it the Singapore of the West. And Hamas said, no, we don't want cheap money. Israel had 4,000 greenhouses, state-of-the-art greenhouses, that had made Gaza food self-sufficient and a giant food exporter. 28% of the Israel's food came out of Gaza. So, Gaza is an oasis, it's abundant fresh water, really rich soils, and it should be very wealthy and great ports, etc. But Hamas went in and destroyed all the greenhouses because they were Jew greenhouses. They said they refused the money to build the port. And they began arming their population. They raised the children from when they're born to kill Jews. And you saw the brutality that occurred on October 7th. Well, nobody's seen brutality like that. If you were imprisoned and tortured and brutalized for 10 years, you still couldn't do that. The people who did that were raised from when they were born to dehumanize Jews, and that's what, Hamas, this is a business to them. It's an organized crime network, and I don't see any choice for Israel but to disarm Hamas. So, I think it's important for our country to support Israel. It's the only democracy in the Mideast, the only place everybody in Israel gets to vote. Palestinians serve in the Knesset, they serve on the judge, there's free speech. Women are free, gays are free, it's the only place in it. I'll say one last thing. There's 27 states in the Mideast. All of them have official religions and apartheid-like rules, except for one, Israel. Israel is the only state in the Mideast that does not have an official religion. The rest of them do. There's 82 states in the world with official religions. Christian states, Buddhist states, Catholic, Anglican, Hindu states. The Jews have one state, but there's no official religion. Everybody can practice any religion they want. There's 20% of the population is Palestinians. They have every right to choose to. So anyway, a lot of the stuff you hear is propaganda. It's important, I think, for all of us to support Israel.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, our time clock is run out. If you want to take a minute just to close out, we appreciate you coming today, and thank you. And if you want to have a minute. I'm sorry.
I want to thank you for the spirit service to our country. My father was the chief law enforcement agent officer in the country. He was the Attorney General of the United States of America when he ran in 1968. He got support from the police. He got support from White. He would go to Watts and say law and order is important. And he believed that, and that's one of the reasons he was able to unite people in this country, is because he believed that for every community, law and order begins, stability, prosperity, community begins with laws that are enforced, that people can rely on, and that are enforced, of course, compassionately. But we need law enforcement, and what you do is the foundation stone of American community. It's the foundation stone of our country. It's the beginning of local democracy, and everything we do, everything that we're successful, begins at your level of democracy. So I'm grateful to you, and thank you for having me here today.
Thank you for taking the time to come see us today. We want to wish you the best of luck in the campaign, and here's a token of our appreciation. Association badge.
Fantastic.
And please tell, hopefully so. And please tell your wife that Curb Your Enthusiasm is my favorite show of all time.
She actually sent a message to all of you guys. Should I go ahead? You know, my wife is
Cheryl Hines on Curb Your Enthusiasm. Did you know he roomed with Larry David for how many years? 2 years.
Hi, Bobby. I just wanted to say hi to all of you at the National Sheriff's Association, and thank you for the work you do. Wow, it's pretty extraordinary. Sorry I couldn't be there, but it's nice to meet you all virtually.
Thank you, Cheryl.
It is a revolutionary thing to go from 2 to 3. In Christianity, there is the Trinity, or the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. You and me and the Spirit between us makes 3. 3 is a powerful shift in perspective. The third eye, the Celtic knot, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, birth, life, and death. The triangle and the traffic light. You have only 2, there will be accidents. 2 is a black and white world, but 3 brings in all the colors. And America is about to make that revolutionary shift from 2 to 3. 2, 3.
Some positive change needs to happen, and it's going to happen.
When was the last time you were into politics? It's like, I haven't experienced that in forever.
There is a rising tide of independent voters sweeping the nation.
Right now, more than any time in history, there are more independents in America than those that claim to be either Democrat or Republican.
It all has to do with allowing this country to create a new cultural identity, and all we have to do is stand together.
So to me, American Independent is really about that free thinker.
Being as true to myself as I can be.
Very human.
Hard worker, this is the little man fighting giants.
The warrior spirit rather than a soldier who just takes orders.
It's that person that's an individual, that knows their worth, that knows their values, and really is not afraid to speak those values.
Honest,
true,
fierce warriors.
The American independence senses that we're ready as a country for something new.
something different for myself and my kids.
People are ready for change. That their ability to choose their leaders have been so pigeonholed by the spirit of greed.
That's why, things have stayed the same.
Red. Blue.
Blue, blue, blue.
Red.
Blue.
Red.
Blue.
Red, red.
Yellow.
There is this moment, this crack in the shell.
The political system is broken.
But what if it's not broken? What if it's working exactly how it was designed to work? One wing or the other of the same bird?
What do you say to voters who are upset that those are the two choices? Biden versus Trump.
Get over yourself. Those are the two choices.
Even if you like the third-party candidate better, they'll basically just say, but if you vote for them, then the person you don't want's going to get in.
But what's really going on is corporate oligarchy versus the rest of us.
When it's us versus them, it's we the people who get hurt.
They use fear and they scare people into thinking that they really don't have a choice, when we do.
The power of 3 breaks the polarization of 2. So yeah, yellow is needed.
For Americans not to feel that they have to vote out of fear, that they feel that they can vote out of hope.
Change can happen.
It's about time. At this moment, an independent coalition winning elections is a non-violent, profoundly unifying pathway.
And we can step out of the paradigm that has kept us limited for all these years.
80 years ago, we ended World War II. 80 years before that, the Civil War ended in Union. And 80 years before that, the United States became an independent nation. Now, we are in a great turning. And if red and blue are the only colors you have, you can create. But never a sunset, never a forest or the fall leaf. If you are attempting to paint the dawn of a new age, you will need yellow, the third primary color.
You cast out a pebble and it creates this ripple, and the ripple is the change that changes the world.
Yeah, power to the people!
Enough of us have a belief that that's possible, that it's happening.
Truth A, you have truth B, and there's the real truth somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, think outside of red and blue. Think yellow.
Sign the petition. Let's get the debate.
Debate is the way you stir the soul of democracy.
You know you all want to see it.
Go to timetodebate.com and sign the petition. Let your independent voice be heard. Thank you.
American Values 2024 is responsible for the contents of this advertisement.